0.
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everyone. This is a meeting of the school committee, Monday, November 21st. We normally meet on Thursdays, but given that this is a short Thanksgiving break week, we're meeting this evening. So thank you for joining us. Let's begin with administrative business, the consent agenda. Would someone like to move the consent agenda? Thank you, Stephen. Is there a second? Thank you, Nancy. Stephen, your vote?
Yes.
Nancy? Yes. Andy?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. So that brings us to superintendent's report.
Good evening, everyone. So great to have you with us virtually as well as in person. I do want to begin tonight's school committee meeting with certainly our thoughts and our hearts go out to the victims of many shooting incidents recently. So the most recent certainly being the heinous shooting in Colorado, but there have been other incidents in October and November. So we certainly want to give our thoughts and sentiments to the families and victims there. With that, I want to move into our superintendent update for tonight to share some upcoming events, some highlights, share a little bit about our school committee visits, as well as then our featured speaker, our presentation for the night, our certificate of academic excellence. So in anticipation of the holiday break, all students and staff may elect to pick up rapid antigen at-home test kits leading up to the Thanksgiving break. These kits are available in all of our schools as well as here at Central Office for folks to pick up. PSB will send 2 boxes of test kits home for every child pre-K through 8. And test kits will be available for our high school students to pick up in both Tappan and the Greeno building. And certainly test kits are available for staff. And we're recommending folks certainly practice good health habits over the break so that we can look forward to everyone returning on November 28th. For our kindergarten registration, the class of 2036 officially begins January 2023. The PSB Office of Registration is hosting 2 virtual information sessions on Tuesday, December 13th and Thursday, January 12th to support prospective students and parents, guardians, and caregivers in their transition up to the kindergarten level. A separate session is designed also for our current BEEPS families, which will be held Wednesday, December 7th. And this is our 2023-24 kindergarten registration or information sessions. We've had a number of excellent events over the past week or since the last time we were all together. The Brookline Education Foundation hosted their annual 5th grade Spelling Bee Sunday, November 13th. Congratulations to Georgiana Green of Runkle School for bringing home the top award at the Spelling Bee. And the winning word was capricious. 3 runner-ups, Evelyn from Heath, Eliza from Ruffin Ridley, and Melanie from Lincoln. So congratulations to all the participants, and now Lieutenant Casey Hatchett, as well as Officer Katie McCabe and Bear were there as judges. And I had the opportunity to serve as the lead judge, which was a very stressful experience. To say the least, it's not as easy as it appears from afar. With the support of our town partners, BHS students hosted their annual Thanksgiving dinner on Thursday, November 17th. There's a shot of that reflected here. And we want to say congratulations to both the girls and the boys cross-country teams. Both of them won their Division I state championships on Saturday, November 19th. And so outstanding work to both Coach Mike Glennon as well as Coach Mike DeYoung at BHS for their hard work in leading the team. So it was a great community event to be out there. So many BHS fans were there in support of the students there. As far as our recently completed school visits, I've been at Driscoll, Florida, Ruffin, Ridley, Baker, and Pierce. Pierce and Baker were two of the full day events where I stayed the entire day at the campus. So great opportunities to visit classrooms and get in instructional spaces, visits with students and parents. And so you see some of the shots here. We also have a shot captured in the lower center there from our principal leadership training. And that's the math team working with our leaders on some math shifts that are occurring. So again, lots of great instruction happening there. Like I said, I get into classes and I get so immersed into what's going on, sometimes I forget to take pictures. And today, when I was at Pierce, Jacob greeted me when I entered the room and said, "Hey, Superintendent, come over to my table. You can help me work on my project." So I just love that agency. He introduced me to the team members that were sitting at his table and then put me to work a little bit there with his team. But lots of great happenings across our buildings. And so we have very much to be pleased and proud of, and also work that we need to continue doing to make our system even better. David, did you want to say anything about our select board visit, or will you do that later? Okay. We also, David and I attended a select board meeting last week, and so he will give an update on that event. Now for our real reason for being here tonight. I am pleased to share with our school community the presentation of the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents Award for Academic Excellence to Brookline High School seniors who have distinguished themselves from their peers. We are honored this evening to welcome awardees Donnell O'Neill and Serena Ibanez to our meeting. Did I say that right? Close, right? We are honored this evening to welcome Donnell and Serena. The Mass Excellence Awards are reserved for some of our most accomplished students who have demonstrated not just their academic potential and integrity, but also who have shown great determination, perseverance, and strength of character. These students truly represent the very best of Brookline High School. We are delighted that Donnell and Serena are with us in person this evening, joined by their families and support networks here in Town Hall and by many others who are watching the live stream meeting. At this time, I would like to invite BHS Associate Dean Allen up to the podium to introduce each of the awardees to all of us and help us learn what makes Donnell and Serena so deserving of this prestigious honor. Dean Allen.
Good evening, everybody. So thank you, Dr. Guillory and school committee members, for inviting us here tonight to recognize these two amazing students from the class of 2023. As one of the deans of the 12th grade, I have the honor of speaking about tonight's recipients. I'm going to start with Donnell O'Neill. So this testimonial is written by his guidance counselor with my help, and here it goes. So 5 words Donnell's guidance counselor, Clifton Jones, uses to describe him are determined, resilient, loyal, perceptive, and athletic. He is a remarkable young person who is well on his way to achieving the goals he's set for himself. Despite the lack of some traditional home supports enjoyed by most BHS students, Donnell has carved out a path to success through his own merit, motivation, and determination. No matter the challenge of the coursework, Donnell rises to meet these challenges with honor and optimism. Teachers have recognized how hard he is working and how much he has matured over his 4 years at BHS. The African American and Latinx Scholars teacher leader has made him a teacher's assistant for one of their 9th grade classes. He is an excellent tutor and mentor, she reports. He is such an appealing kid, such a good heart, with such a good heart that he tends to collect adults who love him and try to help him succeed. That's true even tonight with this nomination, where I had the pleasure of reaching out to a group of over 10 Brookline educators who are a part of his inner circle to tell them of this achievement, me included. Aside from Danel's academic pursuits, he is also a talented athlete. He is an effective leader that is admired by both coaches and his teammates. And this year, Danel has been an integral part of the varsity football team. He has not only become a better player, but also has increased his discipline. As we continue to watch him mature in and outside of the classroom, we see him becoming an ever more impressive young man. Danel is as gifted and sincere as he is a leader. As the years have flown by, we feel privileged to have witnessed him growing and evolving. And from our own time together on Zoom in Spanish class, when school was online and in person, I had the pleasure of working with him where he would email me and let me know that his internet didn't work, but that he could still do the assignment, and we would FaceTime from the classroom together. Until today, when he's here with us, where we still have a little bit of Zoom going on. We are so proud to see him here demonstrating such great resilience, grit, and determination. So with that, I would like to say congratulations, Danel. Come on down here. It's time.
So the Certificate of Academic Excellence reads, Donnell O'Neill, having duly qualified under the standards prescribed by the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents, is hereby awarded this Certificate of Academic Excellence, in witness whereof the seal of the association and the signature of the Superintendent of Schools are hereunto affixed. Congratulations.
So now I'm wondering if I should have lifted this up the whole time. Should I do it this way? Is this better? Okay. So I have the pleasure of introducing our second student this evening, who is Serena Ibanez. This testimonial was provided to us by Nicole Bent, guidance counselor at BEHS. Serena is amazing. She is a miracle. She understands the gift each new day is. She understands more than most the opportunities that lie ahead of her, and I being Nicole, have no doubt she will make the most of them. Serena was born with a heart condition. It became apparent early on that the medical care she was receiving in her hometown of Barcelona, Spain, would not be enough to keep her alive. Serena began traveling back and forth between Boston and Spain, and eventually in 2018, the doctors at Children's Hospital in Boston recommended Serena stay longer. So Serena and her family applied for a legal extension for her stay, which was denied. And thus began the legal battle. In her words, throughout high school, I have had to balance school with many medical appointments and have had to deal with an added burden of a legal situation that has required me to be interviewed by journalists, deliver speeches, write extensive letters to politicians. But if you know Serena, you know that she can handle it. She is tenacious and will defy the odds. She has done that time and time again. Serena amazes in the classroom too. Her epic teacher says, Serena, you are a kind and thoughtful student, and I'm so lucky to teach you. You are so hardworking and conscientious. I can't wait to see where you go. Her Latin teacher adds, it's such a pleasure working with Serena. She works hard, is eager to learn, and is such a kind and thoughtful classmate to her peers. She works so hard and has maintained an intense academic load without the parental support so many of her peers rely on to be successful. And that is not even factoring in the countless medical appointments that disrupt her daily schedule. We honestly do not know how she does it. We don't know how Serena does a lot of things. Despite significant medical issues and the chronic pain that accompanies them, Serena manages to have a very typical high school experience. She was a member of the fencing team and is the opinions editor for the school newspaper, The Sagamore. She pays it forward, volunteering with international students as a BHS ambassador and by co-leading the Global Voice Club. She was selected through a competitive application process for the Ripple Writing Fellowship for students who love the written word and want an opportunity to develop and expand their skills as writers. We love the passion and commitment she brings to her activities. And Nicole has only covered a few here. She does much more. So Serena is a special person, and Nicole values every encounter she has with her. They are reminders about the strength of the human spirit. Nicole says, "Serena, you amaze me. The world would be a different place if there were more people like you. We feel lucky to know you and be a part of your world." Thank you, Serena.
The Certificate of Academic Excellence is presented to Serena Ibanez, having duly qualified under the standards prescribed by the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents, is hereby awarded the Certificate of Academic Excellence, in witness whereof the seal of the association and the signature of the Superintendent of Schools are hereunto affixed.
We get to be in a photo with them? Oh, great.
Serena and Donnell, before you leave, if you all would like to come to the podium and make some brief remarks, you're more than welcome to do that.
Thank you so much. It means so much to me to come here and be awarded this certificate. So thank you so much.
All right, next up, we have public comment, and we have a few speakers today for public comment. If you could please contain your remarks to 2 minutes, that would be much appreciated. Our first speaker is Miss Miriam Fine.
Hello, school committee members and Superintendent Guillory. I figured I'd come in person. I've watched a few meetings on Zoom and I just miss seeing your faces. So it's nice to see your faces. Anyway, my name is Miriam Fine. I have 2 sons at Brookline High School and 2 other parents, Ben Kelly and Ola Ozernov-Palchik, and I recently launched a literacy coalition to advance the conversations we've been having for years with other parents and teachers and administrators. And this letter is on behalf of 3 of us. And we want to say that literacy is related to everything we all care about for the students in our schools, including social emotional health, academic achievement, and life opportunities. And we're particularly concerned about longstanding methods, materials, practices that can create conditions for inequity and large disparities in outcomes. So we'll be blunt. Some children are not dependent on school to teach them to read, but a significant number are. And when children are not learning to read in school, many families in Brookline have the resources to at least try to teach them at home and or hire outside help. We are not talking about enrichment or pushing kids to sky-high competitive achievement. We're talking about foundational skills that really should be taught to all kids in school. So this evening, we want to request two things from you. First, please listen to a new 6-episode podcast series from American Public Media called Sold a Story. We think it provides important background information about a set of ideas and practices that have informed and continue to inform literacy teaching in Brookline, and that actually make learning to read much harder for some children. It will help you understand the needs and challenges up ahead for Brookline. We are very encouraged to hear that our schools have started implementing a well-validated early literacy assessment in kindergarten through grade 2. And we hope this is a step in the direction of a preventative rather than a wait to fail model. And this brings us to our next request. Please work to eliminate the Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessment system at all grade levels. It is not an evidence-based assessment. It is misleading, it's time wasting. There is evidence that it is unreliable in identifying kids who need help. In the only independent study done on it, it identified kids with 54% accuracy, which is basically like flipping a coin. It's inaccurate in identifying what they need, in measuring progress. A student can score a level G one day, a level J on another. It can easily be replaced with a quick, freely available measure alongside skill assessments when needed and teacher-led informal assessments. A level does not describe a student's strengths or needs and does not meaningfully guide teaching. Eliminating the BAS will also facilitate clear communication with parents instead of a kind of alphabet soup of meaningless levels that parents find very confusing. We understand that change can be hard, and we urge you to make sure that the leadership of the district is informed and well prepared to lead on this issue. To emphasize a point from the podcast, this shouldn't be about what adults want, but about what kids need. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Next up, we have Ola Ozernov-Palchik.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Great. So my name is Ola Ozernov-Palchik. I'm also part of the Brookline Literacy Coalition with Miriam and Ben. I'm a Brookline parent who had a first-hand experience of seeing my son, who is a curious and knowledge-thirsty kindergartner, starting to avoid like sections of the library just because he was taught that the books are not just the right level for him. He wouldn't even try to read them. I'm also a reading scientist who has been doing reading research for almost 2 decades. And so I'm gonna just share some of the research findings that I think are relevant for the conversation we are having today. So when choosing a universal screener, it is important that the screener has good sensitivity. So it minimizes false negatives, which is in COVID terms, getting a negative COVID test when you have COVID. Specificity is eliminating false positives, which is in COVID terms, getting a positive result when you don't have COVID. And false negatives in particular have very serious implications for students who fail to receive the support they need. A recent study of 500 students in grade 2 and 3rd from diverse backgrounds evaluated how well BAS, which is the benchmark assessment system that Miriam has mentioned and has been used by our district as a screener, as well as Diebel's oral reading fluency, which is the new measure that's been added to the battery, performs in predicting children's reading scores. And so they found that BAS, in combination with ORF, was less sensitive than ORF alone in identifying true risk. And specifically, BASC actually contributed to missing students who are at risk. And this assessment just takes about 15 to 30 minutes to administer. So administering this assessment helps us miss the children who actually need help from us. And so what happens to students who are being missed by our screeners? A systematic review of literature found that interventions that are administered in kindergarten through second grade have 4 to 5 times the effects than interventions administered in later grades. In fact, the effects on children's reading comprehension, fluency, spelling are small when interventions are administered in upper grades, so third grade or later. It is important to highlight that this review only included studies that provided intensive, over 100 hours, explicit and evidence-based interventions. So interventions most effective are still not as effective when administered in later grades. And what happens to students who are missed in early grades and are not properly remediated in later grades? Research shows that children who have persistent reading difficulties are at higher risk of poor mental health outcomes, more likely to drop out of high school, and are less likely to pursue higher education. We also know that the duration of education is correlated with a person's earning potential and a strong predictor of a person's health and longevity. So literacy is a human right. And based on our most recent AMCAS scores, our district has been failing our most vulnerable students. And so the first step towards positive change, we propose to eliminate BAS assessment because it is a meaningless and resource consuming assessment from the screening battery, and just stick to DIBELS, which we know works in identifying students who are at true risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Ben Kelly.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank Ola and Miriam just for all the amazing work you do. I personally feel honored to be part of this Brookline Literacy Coalition with you. And I want to thank the teachers and administrators in the Brookline schools who've been working on this issue, because I know a number of you have, and also to the members of the school committee who've been advocating for change in our literacy instruction. I hope that the district will quickly make significant changes that reflect the scientific research on how children learn to read, eliminating the BAS being, first amongst those. The issue of reading instruction came to my attention when my now 6th grader was much younger. She was having difficulty learning to read, and we could see that she was in fact losing confidence in reading. When my wife and I learned that the LLI program that she was placed in would basically continue along the same lines as the in-class instruction, specifically cueing methods and phonics instruction, we took matters into our own hands, and we taught her ourselves how to decode and thus how to read. She's doing fine now, and obviously I can't know what would have happened if we didn't teach her ourselves. But what I do know, and what worries me deeply, is this. She had been exposed to books from an early age. She had a large vocabulary. She doesn't have any learning disabilities. And my wife and I had the time and the resources to teach her ourselves. So what worries me is, what about the kids whose families don't have those resources, whose kids are coming in with less exposure to books, fewer resources at home, and then rather than being taught to read, they're being taught to guess at words, to look at pictures, and they're being taught skills that poor readers use. So Emily Hanford's podcast told a story. It resonated with me on many levels, but I just wanted to share one quote. And this was from a teacher named Lacey Robinson, who for some time had been a devotee of Lucy Calkins. Lacey became a teacher. After many years as a teacher, she became a teacher in an affluent district in the hopes of bringing what was being taught there to the poor schools that she had been working at in the South before. But what she found was that, quote, those white affluent students who weren't learning how to decode in school, they were learning how to decode at home with tutors. I know, because I became one of them. So I think that everyone who isn't up to speed on the current science of reading instruction should really listen to Emily's podcast. Emily is a Brookline High graduate, by the way. And as it lays out very clearly the issues with the curricula that are used in far too many schools, including Brookline. I'm glad we're now using the M-Class Dibble screener in K-2, and I hope that we'll eliminate the BAS for higher grades, as well as divest from curricula that are not teaching our kids to read, and invest in the professional development for our educators to work with evidence-based curricula. Brookline really needs to turn the corner and become a leader on this issue for the sake of our students. Every child has the right to be taught to read. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Kimberly Arkin.
Hi, can everyone see me and hear me?
We can, yes, go right ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about this issue. I'm going to echo a lot of things that have already been said. I had a daughter at the Lawrence School in Brookline until 3rd grade, which was 3 years ago. We left in dismay at the state of the literacy curriculum and frankly at the state of special ed. She is dyslexic. The word dyslexia was never uttered in school walls. And when I came with a neuropsych report, finally after she'd gotten an IEP, I was told by the special ed coordinator for the district that nothing that the neuropsychologist recommended could be provided for her because nobody was trained in the building and because there weren't the resources to do it. But that was 3 years ago, and I keep hearing about things changing. And notably, Emma's 1st grade teacher, who was the person who flagged her as dyslexic in the first place and told me the school would never utter the word, but that she knew it was happening, caught me the other day and she said, you wouldn't believe how much things are changing. Things are changing so much. There's finally a screener for K-2, which is great. And they're working against the worst parts of the Calkins curriculum. So now instead of getting students to guess based on context or pictures, they're trying to get students to sound things out. So they're doing 1 cueing instead of 3 cueing. And they've hired OG tutors in the building for tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. And on one level, I was excited. This does sound like improvement, but on another, it's a hallmark of what's still deeply broken about the Brookline system, because rather than implement a science-based reading curriculum, they're using a broken system against itself, right? So maybe fewer kids are going to struggle with what my daughter was taught to do and has hindered her from reading for years, which is to randomly guess based on a letter or 2 in a word. But it doesn't mean that they're getting an approach to reading that actually teaches kids to read, right? So now there's some phonics, yay, but there's not the other stuff, right? The roots, the suffixes, the prefixes, the morphology, the stuff that teaches kids how words work. So therefore they can understand them and think about how to spell them, even if they don't have the orthographic memory that other children do. So, I think it also means that Brookline's approach is still haphazard because it so happens that this one principal decided to hire some OG trained tutors. It doesn't mean the next principal down the road is going to do that, right? There's no systemic approach to thinking about what happens to kids either in classrooms or in pullouts after they have been labeled as at risk by a screener, right? So there's no attempt to actually plan or think through systemically how to prevent this at the very beginning, and then what to do about it for all those kids who are beyond 2nd grade already, what to do about it once it's become clear that they're not learning to read. So I just wanted to say, yay, there's a screener, but a screener is so not enough. I think it's time for the school committee and the Brookline administration to get serious about learning equity. It's not just about dyslexic kids. The MCAS scores say it all in terms of learning equity, which means attending to the broken literacy curriculum. So I would support repealing the BAS just like everybody else has said, but also getting a science-based curriculum into every classroom so that dyslexia doesn't become a special ed problem because you're actually teaching kids to read in the classroom where they need to learn to read.
Thank you. Next up is Susan Arkin.
We had to switch places. I am Emma's grandmother, Kimberly's mother. There's some bad news, and that is that you have a teaching reading problem. But there's some good news too. You're not alone. It's not a problem that's just limited to Brookline. It's also good news that your community is out in front on this. They are out there. You need to be ahead of them and not behind them. The good news is also that people know how to teach reading. And I sent the school committee members a letter this morning so that you have a fuller sense of what my remarks might be. But people know how to teach reading, so the problem is fixable. It's also good news that you're a thoughtful, smart, intelligent group of individuals who has a significant role to play in, as does the superintendent and his staff, in making sure that this happens. The good news is you can decide whether teaching all children to read is important to you. And if it is, then you can set goals and you can set accountability measures and you can make it happen. And that's my message from my background, which I've done your job in another district, and we do have a job to do. It doesn't take away from the superintendents. And I want to thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jennifer Murphy.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I will keep it brief because I'm also here because I'm concerned about the literacy curriculum in Brookline Public Schools. I have two children in first grade and second grade, and I became very concerned when my older child started kindergarten and he was not learning or showing any progress in acquiring literacy skills throughout kindergarten. I was alarmed by the BAS and the inconsistency with what it was showing. I didn't know what was happening or I didn't understand. So I fully support what the previous speakers have said about eliminating the BAS. And I also fully support the idea of eliminating the idea of teaching kids to guess, because when my child was in first grade, he attended LLI daily, and his progress report from the LLI instructor noted that he was showing progress because he was showing that he could look at the pictures for clues. And I found that really alarming. There was nothing in there about whether he could decode. And the truth is he did not have any word attack skills. We're working on them now. But it's quite alarming when your child comes to you in first grade with a fearful look on his face and says, "Mom, don't tell anybody this, but I don't read at school. I pretend to read." And that's how bad it feels. So he knew that he wasn't reading, but that he was pretending to read those leveled readers. He knew he was supposed to look at the pictures to guess, and that's what he was doing, but he knew he couldn't read. So I'm just going to share that personal bit from my family, but I fully support what the previous speaker said. And I would like to say this is not a should do soon kind of priority. This is a must do now priority from my perspective. I mean, my kids are little. I don't expect that any changes would be in place in time to really help them, because my first grader is showing similar signs of the guessing and the missing the comprehension. And but it's something that we really cannot wait any longer on. These kids, not just the dyslexic kids, the ones who seem real capable of picking it up on their own, when they're taught to guess, it hinders their ability to comprehend. And it's something that we must address now, in my opinion. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And that concludes public comment for this evening. I would note that all the speakers today were speaking regarding literacy, and there will be a discussion later in today's meeting regarding the M-Class dyslexia screener, which is a related topic certainly. But next up, we have a special education program update.
Thank you. And I see Deputy O'Connell in the Zoom window there. So she is going to lead us through this update on student services, as well as primarily focusing on special education this evening. Ms. O'Connell.
Good evening, everybody. Can everyone see the screen that I've just shared?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you for the privilege of your time this evening. The Public Schools of Brookline welcomed me as the interim deputy of student services in mid-August. And in many ways, this presentation can be considered a 90-day update. I wanted to begin by thanking the members of my student services leadership team this evening. I believe most are watching. Linda Kirby, my office manager, it turns out she is my right and left hand. Dr. Nadine Mole, Director of Special Education for BEEP, FRR, Lawrence, Pierce, and Driscoll. Sam Bracey, Director of Special Education for Runkle, Heath, Lincoln, and Baker. Kristen Beaupre, our out-of-district coordinator. Dr. Maria Lataz, Director of Clinical Services and our Title IX coordinator. Dr. Matthew Dubois, our Director of Social, Emotional, and Behavioral Health. And Patricia Laham, Director of Health Education. Several parents, my unsung heroes, have been instrumental in helping me over the past 90 days to better understand the community that is Brookline, the history of student services programming. I'm so grateful. Valerie Freyas, our CPAC liaison this year, was instrumental in helping me prepare this evening. Thank you, Valerie. And last but not least, these beautiful slides were created by Michael Chan, who took the time to truly understand what I was trying to convey and created these pictures that we'll look at going forward. I've clocked myself at about 20 minutes but there are many slides, but I'll be able to move through them quickly, and then I'll be delighted to answer any questions. This slide reflects our current model for supporting students in the world of student services. When I came aboard in order to learn about our schools and the community, I worked to formulate collaborative relationships with all stakeholders and to establish a foundation upon which to move the student services part of the organization forward through proposing both short and long-term academic and operational goals that I'll try to share this evening. There have been many, many conversations, always focused on preserving the traditions and values of the public schools of Brookline, and always asking and talking transparently about the challenges and concerns facing our families and the district. We've established routinized student services leadership meetings, individual supervision and support meetings. And there's also been an extensive document review, school improvement plans, the independent special education review that we'll be talking about tonight, DESE program reviews, school committee policies, and of course, organizational charts, such as the one that you see here. There's much to share and talk about in the world of student services, but tonight we'll focus primarily on special education, both in and out of district. And I've divided the agenda into 4 buckets: the introductory bucket addressing student services mandates, the second bucket addressing important data points for in and out of district programming. We'll revisit the special education review completed in March of 2022. And then finally, as we conclude, I'll share our action plan for potentially realigning resources, ideas for designing internal programs, ensuring compliance with student services mandates, and making some recommendations for staffing. We're aware that broad brush special education is for children ages 3 through 22, and the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, is our governing law for special education. In Massachusetts, this is further complicated by the constant interplay of federal and state regulations. And because Massachusetts takes a more conservative view of the regulations, we juggle the two and often take a more conservative approach in our decision-making. The IDEA grant further disseminates monies through formula funds, providing assistance for education in order to meet these mandated requirements. The slide above lists our legal requirements in the world of student services, and there are no restrictions for these federal and state mandates that are provided at no cost to parents and guardians, are provided by licensed certified teachers, specialists, and clinicians, meet curricular standards, conform with individual education programs, IEPs, and ensure educational progress. The purpose of this slide is to provide some insights as how the Office for Student Services leadership team work together to think about student needs in both in-district and out-of-district programs, while always thinking about the whole child, the individual child, the unique child. Most disabilities can be differentiated by impairments in thinking, cognition, feelings, social and social interactions, language itself, as well as social pragmatics, and behavior, emotional regulation. And because every child is unique, the neurological profile of a child can sometimes lead to dysregulation, and this can become an additional complication in a student's profile as they grow and learn. When programming, our teams are always considering necessary supports in academics, executive functioning, social and pragmatic language, therapeutic and behavioral support, self-awareness, self-advocacy, post-secondary transition planning. So with this in mind, OSS has been engaged in the work of actively listening to our families and staff, considering the strengths of our current programs, there are many, and how our students are matriculating through these programs. We've considered out-of-district student transitions back to our public schools and identified places of vulnerability. Through careful tracking, calculating, and evaluating the needs of students, individual needs of students, I'd like to make some observations and recommendations during the course of this presentation. This slide and ones that immediately follow outline our present programs and services. Brookline has developed a number of high-quality programs for students with a range of unique needs. This reflects the commitment made towards a continuum of services across grade levels and across schools. All schools offer related services, which you see on the right side of the slide, as well as learning centers that address skill weaknesses, executive functioning goals, and more. In addition to these more inclusionary services, Runkle, and I'll be speaking about Heath in just a moment, offers specialized programming for students with autism spectrum disorders. This is the RISE program continuum that you see at the bottom of the slide for students K-8. The Center for Disease Control, the CDC, has been tracking the number of children with autism disorders since 1996. And most recent data continues to show that this is our fastest disability category with the most complex service delivery needs. ASD is reported to occur in all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups, a little more common in boys than girls, and most children have a complicating impairment, such as a developmental disability or a speech and language challenge, behavioral and neurological issues. With the commitment of the entire faculty and staff to students placed at Runkle, RISE provides intensive support for students diagnosed with autism spectrum and related disorders. At Heath School, we can see that the K2 RISE program has been developed, but as these children matriculate to higher grades, additional services and programs will be needed. We'll speak about this a little bit further on. At Driscoll School, continuum programming for students with language-based learning disabilities is in place, including addressing the needs of students with nonverbal learning disabilities. This is the school that offers intensive programming in Orton Gillingham, Wilson, and other language-based interventions. In addition to learning center supports and related services, specialized services at the Lincoln School offer a supportive sub-separate setting for students with medical challenges. Lawrence, you can see that while there is related service support and learning center support, inclusive supports for students, specialized programming at Lawrence does not currently exist. This is similar to the Pierce School. Ruff and Ridley, a continuum of therapeutic learning centers, offer a range of supports to students with social, emotional, and behavioral challenges. While some of our schools may not have highly specialized programs, we have been considering issues of equity and access in all school buildings. Specific to Baker, our blue ribbon school, we have identified a rather urgent need to enhance accessibility for some non-ambulatory students in the building and on the playground. So I'll digress just a moment to show a few pictures. At Baker, we are still working on a cost analysis for your consideration, but we wanted to share our thinking that students who are non-ambulatory in wheelchairs should be able to play with their peers and access all that their schools can offer. These photos highlight some ADA repairs as well as some recommendations for play equipment, one of the priorities being a movable basketball hoop. This request specifically highlights the need to include students in the least restrictive setting. Moving on to Brookline High School, these last two slides really show the strengths of our high school programming where multiple specialized programs address the needs of students. This slide shows the more inclusive programs offered at BHS. Second slide addresses specialized sub-separate programs. There are 6 primary drivers to a special education budget, 6 drivers that always impact planning day to day and year to year. The number of students we serve, the number of faculty and staff needed to educate our students, the number of services required for students to meet their goals, the frequency of those services, and the types of programs in district or out of district. And having taken the time to drill down and review our in-district programs and services, this slide provides us with some information about where we might continue to put our future energies. This is a small example of the kind of analysis that we've introduced that leads to brainstorming and consideration for program continuums and new design. I have highlighted the area, the disability categories where students tend to require more than what we can provide in the public schools currently. The majority of students requiring out-of-district placements are students with a range of autism spectrum disorders, emotional impairments, and significant learning disabilities. And you can also see from the slide that most students who require an alternative model are placed out at the secondary level. Designing programs that serve students with these kinds of challenges are part of our focus this evening. This slide breaks down our out-of-district students by grade. The majority of students with intensive needs are being educated in out-of-district placements with a constant focus on opportunities to bring students back when appropriate. These numbers are real, but most importantly, they represent our students, real children. And our goal is to create programs within our schools that make integration and inclusion meaningful. We're cognizant of keeping tuitions manageable as well, but we're primarily concerned with meeting the needs of our students. During the last 4 years, our out-of-district population is decreasing. As I transitioned to the public schools of Brookline, I was made aware of my former colleague, Dorsey Yearley, who I had worked with for years, that she had completed an independent special education program review, which took place during the 21-22 school year. The identified questions for this study were, what is the administrative structure for the public schools of Brookline? And what are the communication structures for parents and guardians? And are the right students identified at the right time? Are we meeting the needs of our students? As a young student teacher at Driscoll, 40 years ago, I have aged myself here, and now returning as your deputy, I'm acutely aware that the culture of Brookline is reinforced through the uniqueness of each school and the opportunity for each child to spend many developmental years in that school. The variability school to school can be significant. And for the Office of Student Services, we're committed to considering core practices across all schools so that parents and guardians can feel confident that our approaches are consistent, whether you're in a specialized program at Driscoll or Runkle or participating in programming at Pierce. One of the questions I asked myself was, did the report get it right? Dorsey and I did have many conversations, but I had those conversations after I drew some of my own conclusions and then checked back. I think the report did get it right. And as I review the 4 major categories on the slide where recommendations have been made, I think there's even some urgency for those recommendations. The first we'll address is homeschool communication, and I apologize that the team meeting IEP parent guardian survey is a little small on this slide. But the first recommendation made pertains to enhancing homeschool communication. This was introduced in mid-October. It is a routinized survey, not a one and done, that seeks parent guardian feedback after every special education meeting, a mailing of a proposed IEP, a proposed evaluation or reevaluation. They're mailed hard copy. There's also a link option, a Google option, and we are ramping up with our parents and guardians using this form, which gets sent directly back to me. Preliminary feedback has been extremely positive so far, but as always, we're fine-tuning. There will be an opportunity that we'll review the form, but so far the feedback that I'm getting has been extremely positive and has truly enhanced that sense of connectedness between home and school. And it's also allowed us to respond immediately without wait time for questions and concerns that come up. Second area that we that addresses Brookline that Dorsey raised was regarding our pre-referral initiatives. And during this 22-23 school year, in partnership with the Office of Teaching and Learning, we have been focused on strengthening our free pre-referral practices. We've contracted with the new teacher center to better understand the strengths and areas of growth for our building-based child study teams. The focus has been on offering a range of general ed interventions and options rather than immediately pursuing a special education evaluation. We've been working hard on uniform response to intervention, including tutoring students for skill gap remediation, providing counseling for social emotional support. Dr. Miller will follow me in discussing M-Class, our choice for an early literacy screener. And in December, Dr. Dubois will be coming to speak with you about our social emotional screener as well. The third recommendation category pertains to program design and development, with a recommendation to prioritize autism spectrum disabilities and the needs of students with serious social emotional vulnerabilities. You'll recall prior slide outlining Heath's highly specialized K-2 program. A successful K-2 RISE program has been developed with a strong focus on inclusion. 4 of our students will be matriculating to grade 3 next year, and creative scheduling might certainly be possible to accommodate each student's growth and movement. However, as all the children matriculate to higher grades, additional continuum programming will absolutely be necessary to address age span and programming requirements. We also want to use this opportunity to look closely at the student cohorts at both Runkle and Heath and think about the very best student experience based on profile. We also hope with this expansion, we can consider having students in out-of-district placements whose families might be interested in an in-district option to offer an alternative. What all ASD programs have in common are treatments that address behavior, social, and relational support. But some of our cohorts may respond to applied behavior analysis, while other students may grow in a more inclusionary classroom. We want to be sure that we're looking at how we meet the needs of each population and cohort of students. Our second area of programmatic focus is delving more deeply into issues and support of mental health. In Brookline, as in many other school districts, mental health challenges continue to increase, and the COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact. For some students, a mental health crisis may be temporary. For a traditional student, a short-term intervention may be successful. But for others, a diagnosis may emerge over time and lead to a disability impacting progress and requiring specialized intervention and eligibility for special education. The bridge between special and general education must be coordinated through a lens of federal and state mandates and regulations. When we talk about the eligibility of a student for special education, we must constantly consider severity, personal safety, level of stress, intensity, frequency, and duration. For a student to be eligible for special education, the mental health issues must debilitate to the extent that a student's progress becomes limited. Because we know that middle school is often a time for emergence for serious worries, we're beginning to envision a Winthrop House program for students in grades 6 to 8, designed as a continuum to the high school Winthrop House program. We're seeking input regarding the best school to house such a program and recognize that where this program is housed will be critical to its success. And we're confident that our community members, you, will be able to help us expand on our ideas. The continuity of programming across grade levels and among schools is a critical element of providing coordinated programming for our neediest students, allowing the majority to remain in their home communities while achieving mastery of skills. And finally, last but not least, the report suggested that we take a hard look at the special education administrative oversight for our schools and programs. I'll begin by saying that in these first 90 days, we have resolved 19 of 22 complaints, disagreements, filings that were made between 2020 and 2022. While I don't fully understand the context or background of every complaint, I certainly understand the complaint itself, the concern itself. And while we have resolved many of these dilemmas to avoid the reoccurrence of future filings, we have introduced new routine practices internally, soliciting opinions, meeting with constituents regularly, engaging our parents and guardians, being proactive about asking for input, following through, demonstrating respect for different opinions. This slide has been modified from the beginning of my presentation to speak to my recommendation for a third director of special education at the elementary level. We currently have 2 special education directors for all pre-K 8 schools. And in my experience, having a special education director that is in charge of 4 to 5 schools, addressing the needs of all special education students in that school, regardless of the quality of the person doing the job, it's not going to be as well as we can do it. The job seems to be spread too thin to adequately cover the needs of the students in all the programs. The ratio is beyond what is reasonable for a school where we have high expectations for a level of service, oversight, and collaboration. Currently, we're doing an adequate job with current staffing, but I know our goal is not to set a standard of being adequate. Superintendent Guillory has set a standard for excellence, and we certainly cannot be excellent if we're not staffed up to take care of our most complex students. It goes without saying that I would anticipate that this staffing increase, if possible, would also help us mitigate the challenges and disagreements I outlined on the previous slide. My last slide is this. Strategic planning initiatives require a focus on inclusive practices, physical accountability, program design, and curricular initiatives, with the goal of planning for all of our current students to matriculate through our schools. Our requests reflect a multi-year strategy of working with families and students about their children's academic, behavioral, and social needs, and the development of programs in our schools that can meet those needs. This is our legal mandate to serve students in the least restrictive environment. And with that, our vision includes, in the immediate, to add a third director of special education for grades pre-K to 8 to redistribute responsibilities and offer more hands-on leadership in our specialized program. Consider moving towards the RISE continuum at Heath by adding the program necessary for grades 3 to 5 and over time 6 through 8. A Winthrop House continuum for students in grades 6 through 8. And I digress a little bit because one of our student services priorities falls in the world of health and nursing. We have funded a full-time nurse through our health grant, which ends this June of 23. And the recommendation is to hire that nurse within the district budget. And finally, the Baker School Playground Accessibility Project. The Office of Student Services appreciates your support. Our school committee, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have. Thank you again for the opportunity to serve the public schools of Brookline.
Thank you very much for that very thorough, comprehensive presentation. I'm sure we're going to have many questions, so who would like to go first?
And let me stop and share.
All right, so I guess I'll start with one of the last items that you presented regarding the proposal for a Winthrop House type program for grades 6 through 8. So it sounds like you would envision that being housed at a K-8 school, or do you see that as being a totally separate program in its own building?
I'm just checking to make sure I still have sound. No, I think that the Winthrop House could certainly be housed in one of our K-8 schools. I think that that requires a lot of discussion and thought, but I certainly think it could be housed in one of our schools.
Would you envision that students after grade 5 in the schools that do not have Winthrop House and transfer into that school, do they get identified early?
Potentially, yes. It's similar to our other specialized programs where a student may transition to a highly specialized program, which may be different than what would naturally be their home school.
Okay, thank you. Another question I have is you talked about pre-referral initiatives, and I'm just wondering, what does the time scale look like for that? Because I think that's an excellent idea, but I do worry a little bit that if pre-referral initiatives end up taking a very long period of time, that could potentially delay special education referrals.
Yeah, we have discussed that if we're trying a general ed intervention, we're talking about 6 to 9 weeks of tutoring to address what appears to be a skill gap rather than a disability, but putting a time limit on it. And the new teacher center, which has been working with us all fall and will be presenting on a broader scale in December, has offered other ideas as well. But I agree that this can't be an open-ended, let's spend the whole year seeing if there's a positive response to RTI or something else. But that's what we're talking about.
You mentioned various categories for pre-referral initiatives, and one of them, the social emotional learning universal screening. So that obviously implies that every single student would be screened. Would every student be screened in the other areas as well, or would those just be based on a individual teacher's observations of a child?
You know, I would rely on Dr. Dubois because similar to the M-class screener focused on K2, the goal would be to have screening used through grade 8, but I believe the rollout is for lower grades and then giving that a try and then moving forward from there.
All right, thank you. I'll move to some other committee members now. Helen?
Thank you, and thank you for this really in-depth report. I truly appreciate it. I have a couple of questions, if I can. One, this program, this Winthrop House program for 6 to 8, how do you see that as possibly different from the Bright program that we have at the high school? And I mean, I think it may be just the kids who would be referred to it, but I'm curious as to how you might see that.
Yeah, we think very highly of the Bright program, and the conversation, I think I've been here 90 days, but we, at first, the discussion was, well, could we just bring Bright back at pre-K?
Maybe we should tell people actually what Bright is, because there may be people at home who don't even know.
Yeah, these are intensive therapeutic services that actually originated in Brookline. And so there could possibly be a strong partnership between the two. we are finding a distinction to be made between bright intervention at the high school and the Winthrop House
Right.
population. So we know that one is more focused on stabilization, and the Winthrop House model is more for the long haul. So committing ourselves to students over 3 years or 4 years at the high school, providing them with not just the stabilization, but then beginning to learn to take risks and move forward through supports that are embedded throughout the whole school day.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. I understand that difference. I actually know both programs, so I appreciate that. And the nurse, what is the job description for that particular nurse? Or, I mean, not the person, but the position.
The position has been literally to provide extra nursing support and focusing on our students who have medical needs. But the way we've organized it is that is just another nurse, because everyone's sharing the responsibilities. But when we had originally written the grant, I did not write it. Ms. Lataz wrote it, but Ms. Lahan wrote it. But the nurse is providing that additional staffing.
But wasn't that more because of COVID and the need to have more staffing?
Originally.
Because we do have just to be clear, I think we do have a nurse in every elementary school, and I think we have 3 at the high school.
We do, and we do not have any full-time nurses in any of our BEEP programs. And so while we meet the requirement, we meet the state requirement, but that's not necessarily what's best. So with our BEEP programs in multiple locations, we have a nurse 1 day a week in one location, 2 days a week in another, and it's a little bit fragmented. And even as recently as today, we have been addressing the needs of our little tots and making sure that we have seamless medical coverage for them. And so the additional position would address that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mariah?
Thank you, and thank you, Lisa, for this presentation. It was very in-depth. I had 2 questions to ask. One, and this is a little bit of a follow-up on what David was asking about the pre-referral interventions. So my understanding is that there can be a referral to special education, but there can also be a parent request. And I just wanted to confirm that if a parent requests an IEP, that there is still that timeline that starts if they request, correct? That they do not delay their rights or lose any of those rights. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I appreciate you drawing attention to that. If a parent believes that a gen ed intervention would serve their child, then we might move forward, but parents have the right to request an evaluation, and we will honor that request.
Okay. And then my second, thank you for that. And then my second question, and I'm not sure if I just missed it. There was so much information. I might have just missed it, but
I'm
you
sorry.
No, it's okay. It was great. It was just a lot to process. So at the last slide, you talked about, there was 4 or 5 different things. And one of them was the Heath Rise strand, which essentially I understood could be possibly deferred a year, but really not more than that, because those kids, you could stretch it to K3, but it's not going to get stretched to K4 basically. So that is coming. And then the one thing I didn't see there though, but you talked about it earlier, was the out of district maybe I didn't catch it, the out of district aggregation of where you saw programs coming back. I didn't see any. Did I miss like a recommendation, or are you still doing that analysis of which programs could be brought back?
Yeah, we were talking about the predominance of autism spectrum disorders, emotional impairments, and language-based learning disabilities. And Driscoll offers our most intensive program for students with language-based learning disabilities, sort of an alternative to a Carroll school or a landmark school. And of course, we offer comparable programming at the high school. We are doing further analysis on whether additional programming would be needed for students with language-based learning disabilities. And it's very interesting to me to sit in and listen to literacy concerns and sort of what has evolved to date. But I would say the honest answer, Mariah, is that it's that third disability category that we don't yet have a firm recommendation for you, whereas how to respond to students with a range of autism spectrum disorders and emotional issues is much clearer to us at this point.
But let me follow up on that, if I might. When I looked at the numbers, it seemed that roughly speaking, the top three categories all had large populations of students who were out of district. So is the reason that we are not servicing them in their local community that we don't have capacity, or that our programs actually don't meet their needs? I guess I'm confused if we know how to do this, why they're, you know what I mean, why they're not here.
Yeah, I think the number for students with language-based learning disabilities placed out of district for FY23 is 11. So it is a marked difference, and some of those students are placed under settlement agreements. I think that we're studying that population of students to determine whether we need to build capacity or whether it's something else.
Okay, do you know when you will have a sense of that? I'm just thinking about you as more or less presented a little bit of a special education budget request just now, but should we be expecting, is that all that will be requested for FY24, or will there be a broader request coming later relating to new programming?
Yeah, I'm not anticipating a broader budget request beyond what I put out. I feel quite confident in how we're currently addressing those needs for language-based learning disabilities. So I would not anticipate a budget request for FY24. I think the priority is on the RISE programming at Heath and expanding on serving our students with significant social emotional vulnerabilities.
Thank you.
Stephen?
Thanks for that presentation. I have three questions. I'm gonna ask them in reverse order because the last one is close to Mariah's. On the lab at Driscoll, how many staff are trained in the lab on OG or related pedagogies?
You know, I was just meeting with the team on Friday. They are all trained.
How many is that?
And they, 1, 2, 3, 4, with the oversight of Ann Larson, who is an outside consultant who works with them on a weekly basis as they apply their skills with students.
Great, thanks for that. A second question is pretty small, or perhaps not. So you proposed an additional director position. In your experience, is there a rule of thumb that you've used for determining when another director position is needed? Is there a ratio or some other heuristic you use to determine what that level of excellence is needed? At what point you need that other director position?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. The first thing I'll say is that the public schools of Brookline are unique in that many of our public school districts have a break at grade 5 and students transition to a middle school model where generally you have a special education director devoted to middle school programming. In our case, we are structured differently, where students are spending a much longer period of time through grade 8 in one school. So we grappled with a third director and said, well, would we, to address the developmental needs of our students with special needs, would we have that third director focus solely on 6 to 8 programming? And we realized that that would not work in the public schools of Brookline, because you would have one director that was just running around all the elementary schools, trying to focus on 6 to 8. So we need to think about our recommendations consistent with the culture and values that we want to make sure remain part of our culture. So we know that the intensity of programming and the supports that students need, that we know what we have is not adequate. And I think that the third director, rather than just having them focus on 6 to 8, we would do some shifting of responsibilities, but we would do it differently than just having that third person focus.
So it's really looking at the level of need and seeing that a third director position would do a lot to mitigate that level.
Right, right.
Okay. Thank you. So then the third question I have for you. So I know, you know, that before you got here, no fault of your own, Brookline was found to have significant levels of disproportionality in referring Black and African American students to special education, especially in the area of special learning disabilities, specific learning disabilities. I think it was 20% of students with specific learning disabilities, Black and African American. The last time I think we heard a presentation on that was January. That wasn't including your presentation. I think to have been flagged for that, we would have had to have been disproportionate, had that disproportionality for 3 consecutive years. Do you know if we're going to be found disproportional for a 4th consecutive year, or be found to, and have the district be the subject of another intervention?
Well, am I the first deputy who's going to volunteer to come back and present to the school committee? I would like to come back after the new year to talk about this topic, because the disproportionality study group that I hoped to get off the ground in November will not get off the ground until the end of December or early January, because I wanted to be sure that I had enough parent guardian participation to really delve into the issue. I'm
sorry, I'm actually asking on the year that's passed, because I'm assuming the report that's going to come out from DESI is going to be on the year that's passed. So I'm wondering if we already know whether there's going to be a finding of significant disproportionality.
We don't know, but we are learning about, there's a lot to learn and talk about in our Gen Ed programs that are serving students. For example, several of our Gen Ed programs, whether it's the ACE program at the high school or METCO, we have a high percentage of special education students in those Gen Ed programs. And that may be skewing some of those numbers. So we don't know the answer to that, but we will over the next few months.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. I see my esteemed colleague, Dr. Miller.
Suzanne?
Yeah, thank you, David. And thank you for this. You've learned a lot in 90 days, so I'm impressed. You've been working hard, I can tell. I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit about paras in the special ed programs, and thinking about paras are often assigned to students rather than programs, and you know, how does that feel? And then in relation to that, what kind of training do our paras get to help children with special ed? And then I'm linking that also, I know this is multi-leveled, but to paras in our general ed programs. But you know, they are sometimes helping our children who also need extra help, not special ed yet, but, and so I'm wondering what kind of training they might have. And I don't know if any of that comes under your big umbrella or not, but some of your thoughts around paras.
Yes. I hope that with the addition of the third director, we are going to be able to expand on our professional development offerings. We offer some things to our paras, but not enough. As far as para numbers and sort of beginning to drill down, we've also had a challenge hiring paras, and we've thought about having trading in doesn't seem like quite the right word, but perhaps trading in FTEs for paras to hire licensed special educators that might have expertise around learning disabilities or specialized approaches. But we're also looking very closely at the appropriateness of paras at the middle school level. A student who might have a one-on-one para in second grade, not requiring a one-on-one para for middle school, where developmentally it's a very different experience. So we are grappling with para support, how it's provided, supporting our paras that we do have. I'm not thinking about increasing paras, I'm thinking about realigning paras.
Okay, thank you very much. On another topic, you mentioned the surveys that go out to families after an IEP meeting. And I'm just wondering what happens if you get some negative feedback. I mean, not you, but I mean, that comes back that they're unhappy about something. Who's reviewing that, and who steps up and tries to make it work?
Yep. So I am personally getting those results. I get them every week. If I receive feedback that is offering constructive criticism or sharing a concern, what we do immediately is I bring it to the attention of the director in charge of that particular school and ask them to take charge of outreaching to our family if we've been given contact information, to offer that personal contact and connection to hopefully answer a question or resolve a concern. That's worked very well. It's been appreciated, and it allows us to address issues before they fester and grow. And conversely, I'm getting a lot of positive feedback, and I haven't been as good about sharing that, but the directors have meetings with their ETFs very routinely. For example, last Thursday, Dr. Mall stopped in and she said, would it be all right, could you summarize for me the positive feedback that you received so I can share it with the team? So I will be much better about getting that same level of feedback out on a weekly basis, but it comes directly to me so that I can put that balcony view and also assure myself that we have done immediate outreach where there's concern.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really feel it's an important step in communicating with our families. I'm just curious, is this, do they get this survey after they have a IEP presented to them? Or is this just after the meeting? I'm just kind of curious where this is.
Sort of how to picture it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So the special education secretaries have a big part in this, because whenever an IEP is, a proposed IEP is sent home after a meeting, that's included. If a reevaluation or an evaluation has happened and then there's a follow-up N1, a notification, a summary of the meeting, we send the survey. So we just send, if there's a meeting and then the team reconvenes, a parent may get 2 surveys.
Okay.
So it's just routinized.
Thank you so much. And it is great. Yeah, thank you. I think that's really a big step forward. David, can I ask one more question? Thank you. Could you just talk a little bit more about child study teams? I want to hear a little bit more about the link between general ed and special ed and tiers 1, 2, and 3. And you know, how, you start off with general ed, you get some interventionists, you have some specialists, you move a little bit more, maybe you're going to tier 2, maybe but you're not going to tier 3 yet. You need the IEP for that. Could you just kind of talk about that whole arc that a family, a child would go through? And how,
I certainly can. And I'm sorry to put Dr. Miller on the spot, but this work is credited to her with the new teacher center that has come in to work with our child study teams. And certainly she has the historical view of how the child study teams functioned in the past and how they're functioning now. Leslie, would you mind saying a few words about that?
Sure, of course. Suzanne, we see CST as really a gen ed practice first and foremost. Certainly children who have IEPs may come through the CST, but it's really a way to figure out what are the needs of our students prior to an evaluation, and hopefully they may not need an evaluation. So this is where this plays a really important role in terms of our disproportionality. And really, as we're looking at students, ensuring that we have given students access to every available opportunity prior to a special education evaluation, but also that we've monitored their progress. And so what we have seen quite a few times through CSTs is that you have children that are making a good amount of progress, sometimes a year's worth of growth in a year. But when a child is 2 or 3 years behind, we really need to think about what's next for this child, and really supporting the teaching teams with ensuring that if there's an intervention that's working, making sure that that intervention can stay in place for as long as that student needs access. But it's a support to both the student and the educator. So it's a place where educators can bring problems of practice and collaborate with their colleagues around various interventions, various practices. So we just see this as a high leverage strategy, not just for disproportionality, but really in terms of serving our students and knowing what's working for our students. I do think one of the things I'm hoping that you'll hear prior to the new year is the report that the new Teacher Center has engaged in. They are doing a knockout job with this work. And so one of the things that we're seeing are just that the strategies across CSTs, they can vary. There are many strengths, there are certainly areas for growth, but we really want to figure out what are the most high leverage practices that should be throughout every CST team. I certainly heard loud and clear from CPAC when we met, I don't know if it was the beginning of this year, maybe even last year, that families have questions about how CSTs work and their role in CSTs. I think a lot of times it just is in the schoolhouse. And parents may not be as privy to the information and what's happening in CSTs. So certainly the new Teacher Center is going to give us some guidance on what could make a stronger partnership between families and our CST teams. So that is coming soon.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Andy?
Hi, Leslie. Just a very quick follow-up to that on CSTs. Are you currently able to get enough people who are willing to give their time to serve on these?
So the majority of our teams, I think, are staffed at a really good level. We have made some changes under Dr. Guillory's leadership, where we have increased the stipend. And I think that we need to go back and think about, even with the increase, is this the right amount? Being a CST team leader and member is a lot of work. There's a lot of follow-up with colleagues, a lot of observing of students that happens. Sometimes the follow-up with colleagues can happen outside of school time, or maybe even during the day, which is just another responsibility that we're putting on a teacher's plate. So I think that for the folks who are engaged, it's a real labor of love. And we have to think about what are the pieces we can put in play to make this as seamless and manageable as possible. But right now, I believe that our teams are fully staffed. I haven't heard from any school that they're not able to run a team because it's not staffed appropriately.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer, go ahead.
I actually a lot of people have already addressed the questions that I had, so I really it's more of a comment and a thank you for this information. It's really helpful. I was trying to keep track of the percentages as you went through the schools, the percentage of the sort of the ratio or the percentages of special education students in our schools, and noticed 2 schools in particular with a much higher average. And I just want to simply advocate and to ensure that they're getting the supports that they need, especially with related service providers, that there's adequate staffing at those schools to meet the needs, so that there's equitable access to those across the schools. And just for us to consider those percentages and those ratios when we're thinking about expanding or adding programs at locations.
I appreciate that very much.
Yeah. So, but thank you so much.
Any other questions, comments? All right, well, thank you very much for that presentation and for being patient to address all of our questions. It was very helpful, and we look forward to hearing more in the near future.
Thank you very much.
All right, and so we will now move on to the M-Class Dyslexia Screener Overview Update. Dr. Ryan Miller.
Great. And I should clarify, I'm not a doctor. Maybe one of these days, but not right now. Thank you so much. We're really excited to present. I have 2 of my wonderful colleagues on the call, Michelle Herman, who is the Senior Director of K-8 Teaching and Learning, and also Kristen Gray, who is our interim K-8 ELA coordinator. She is stepping in while Joanna Lieberman is on leave. And I can't say enough positive things about Kristen. Kristen came in right away, didn't miss a beat. And the way that she is commanding the work is really impressive. We're really thankful for her leadership and just excited to present a lot of the work that has actually happened under her leadership. So we will jump right in. So while the focus of our presentation today, and let's see, Michelle, are you going to share your screen? Great. I'm going to wait, let's make sure that works properly. While Michelle is setting that up, great. Perfect. Can everyone see the presentation? Okay, great. So while our time together is really going to focus on the M-Class screener and various aspects of M-Class, I did want to take a few moments to jump head in and address some of the concerns that came up in public comment. I think this is on a lot of people's mind with the podcast that came out, Sold a Story. So I don't want to take a lot of time, but I do want to spend some time on this topic and then also talk to my school committee liaison, the wonderful Jen Monopoly, to talk about a continued conversation, potentially at our next curriculum subcommittee meeting. Michelle, can you go to the next slide? So really quickly, it's really important to me, certainly as the leader of teaching and learning, to talk about how we're being responsive to student needs. We heard in public comment some of the areas for growth, which certainly we have them, but we also have some real strengths of our program. And we've also put a lot of new practices into place to adjust some of the new information and research that we've heard around science of reading. Although I'll say science of reading, this information is not new to many of us. This is the age old when I started teaching in 1996. The debate was phonics and whole language. This to me is very similar. with some new research, definitely new information around some of the curriculum and materials that we use. But Brookline has never negated the fact that we need phonics instruction for our students. Our students need to have very strong phonemic awareness in order to be solid readers. And so that is not new here in the public schools of Brookline. And I really want to be clear about that. That being said, there's always things that we can do to strengthen our practice. And this is just a list of some of those things. I know that certainly in Sold a Story, which I've listened to, there are a lot of questions about particular curriculums and assessments. And those things we're still learning about and researching. At the same time, that some of these pieces, such as BAS, those aren't the only parts to our ELA programming. There are many other parts. And a lot of these changes started back in 2017, even when I first joined the public schools of Brookline in the senior director role of K-8 teaching and learning. That was the very first year that we implemented foundations at the kindergarten level and have continued to implement it in additional grades post 2017. So a lot of these shifts, again, they're not new for us. But I think one of the things that really has to be acknowledged is that the way we move matters. Process matters. Having teacher, family, student input, it matters. I heard one of the speakers talk about doing things quickly. We don't necessarily do things quickly. And sometimes I understand that's not a benefit, but also it helps us have a full understanding of the work that we're doing so that we can avoid any potential pitfalls or unintended consequences. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. I think it's also really important that we take our time so that we train our educators properly. We can buy curriculum, we can change curriculum, but if we don't have the time to thoroughly and properly train and engage with our teachers around professional learning and get their feedback, that's an issue. And it doesn't facilitate a strong implementation. So that's something that we're certainly always thinking about at a district level, is what implementation looks like, as well as what our range of learners need. We have children who certainly are struggling, and we want to think about that, and we want to make things much easier for them as they engage in literacy. And we also have children where reading of complex text comes pretty easily to them, even as young as 5 years old and 4 years old. So we're thinking about that real range. That being said, I won't take a ton of time, but these are just a couple of changes that we've made. Some of these changes even in the last year around literacy. So foundations, we now have in our K-2 classrooms that supports phonics and phonics instruction in those classrooms. Just this year, we also adopted spelling connections, which we're really excited about. I'm personally excited to schedule some time with our 3 to 5 teachers to hear how it's going now that they've had a couple of months under their belt to implement that work. This is something that is really important, as this was an area of real need. We didn't have a strong phonics program. It was really disparate in grades 3 to 5. This puts a more formal, comprehensive program in place around spelling and phonics for our older elementary students. We're also piloting Heggerty phonemic awareness in almost every school, not every classroom, but every school, and we'll take the lessons learned from that and think about possible next steps. Decodable texts. We've used a lot of funding to purchase decodable texts for our classrooms. And as you know, this is really important in terms of supporting the phonemic awareness of our children. And so now we're thinking about what is the professional development that goes along with that. During the PD day, our teachers engaged in some professional development with Kristen around this. And we're already getting some feedback around the texts from our educators. And so thinking about what, in terms of future purchases, what we need to think about. The bullet shifting the balance, I'm going to leave to Kristen. We have a slide on that next, but that is specifically what are the things that we're doing to ensure that we have a balanced program, and to think about a lot of what was talked about in Sold a Story was the 3 queuing system. And so those are some of the practice that we want to mitigate going forward. And so talking about, even though we have Calkins in place, what are the things that we're doing that really denounce the practices that we don't want to see in classrooms? What are they being replaced with? Because again, a curriculum rollout is not easy, and a curriculum rollout needs to be very thorough. So one of the examples I've given in a couple of situations is, we had Think Math, maybe back in 2016, 17. And then it was understood that that Think Math did not address the state standards. It wasn't aligned. And so Brookline stopped using Think Math. And what happened in place of that was that teachers, we did not have a district curriculum. And so amongst classrooms, you could see a variety of materials, curriculums being used. And if you talk to Josh Paris at the high school, he will tell you that that made a difference and it wasn't for the better. And so we want to avoid that. We want to be really thoughtful with any changes that we're making to curriculum. Of course, broadening our book collections to make sure they're culturally responsive. Also expanding our intervention practices. So we don't just use LLI, we use Foundations K-3, we have Hegarty, we have small group targeted instruction. There's a number of practices that we use in intervention, and certainly LLI was a preferred intervention at one point, but I would say in the last couple of years, certainly in the last year, since I've been in the role, I've seen a huge change in the amount of interventions that we offer to our students based on their needs, and also training that we offer to those that implement intervention. Always focused on professional development. And then our assessments, we use Foundations end of unit test, Spelling Connections has an end of unit test, and then M-Class, which we'll talk about today. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristen, and I want her to share some of the work that's happening around how we're bringing science of reading into balanced literacy classrooms. So Kristen?
Hi, everybody. Bear with me. It's 4 against 1 upstairs, but one has just decided to come visit me and join me right now. So sorry. That's the one. There's always a family, right? Okay, so I just want to talk, our top priority, and I'm going to read just because I want to make sure that I'm staying on task. For our ELA department, as always, is to continue to meet the needs of all of our students by using the best instructional practices and supplementing additional resources based on our student needs. And there's not a one-size-fits-all curriculum or approach that we use. And to think that there is one-size-fits-all approach is doing a disservice to our students. So our department really wants to remain vigilant and put our students first rather than politics and publishers. So the ELA department has 2 main goals this school year. First is to create a shared understanding of the science of reading and develop common language with our administrators and K-2 staff. And second is to recalibrate and integrate best instructional practices taken from the science of reading research and incorporate them into our K-2 classrooms. So to help us guide our work as a district, we're using the text Shifting the Balance, the 6 Ways to Bring the Science of Reading into the Balanced Literacy Classroom by Dr. Jan Birkins and Carrie Yates. They are committed to building a bridge between the science of reading and balanced literacy. So like Leslie was saying, we want to shift, not jump. So shifting the balance focuses on ways that the teachers can strengthen their approach to early reading instruction and is designed to help teachers meet the instructional needs of K-2 students. And each chapter focuses on a manageable shift. So I'm just going to take you through a little bit of each shift. So shift 1 is rethinking how reading comprehension begins. So you treat oral language development as an essential ingredient for comprehension. Shift 2 is recommitting to phonemic awareness instruction, which is our commitment to intentional systematic phonemic awareness instruction, which Leslie hit upon a little bit with the Hegarty. Shift 3 is reimagining the way we teach phonics, explicitly and systematically teach how to crack the written code. Shift 4 is revising high frequency word instruction, which is create opportunities for children to pull apart the phonemes and high priority words and match each one to the grapheme that it represents. Shift 5 is reinventing the way we use MSV. So we're prioritizing print as a strategy for the first resort for word solving. Shift 6 is reconsidering text for beginning readers. So we're thoughtfully selecting text with decoding opportunities that students need to practice. So each chapter, which I love about this book, is they start off with some common misunderstandings. They give a short summary of the science and give recommendations for making the shift. So our literacy teams, which at each school, which consists of literacy specialists and coaches, had an opportunity last spring to read through this book and had informative and meaningful conversations with each other. And we have brought some of these shifts into our instructional practices. So we want our principals and other K-2 colleagues to have the same opportunity. Therefore, the ELA department is hosting a series of book club discussions for both principals and K-2 educators in January 2023. So as Leslie had mentioned, we are this year, one of our shifts that we're really focusing on are shift 2 and shift 6, like immediate attention. I mean, they're all immediate, but this is the one where we're putting in a lot of our time that we have for professional development in these two areas. Are we piloting Haggerty phonemic awareness curriculum in some K-1 classrooms? And that they will, with the expectation that all K-1 classrooms will be using it in the school year 2023-24. And grade 2 classrooms also have access to Haggerty. And in school year 23-24, they will use it as a tool for small group instruction based on data from the M-Class screener. So just a little bit, what is the Haggerty phonemic awareness curriculum? Students are being explicitly taught phonemic awareness skills, which is the understanding that spoken words are made up of individual sounds called phonemes. And these lessons are all oral and auditory. So you think of like teaching phonemic awareness, you can teach it with the lights turned out. So students manipulate sounds and words such as isolating sounds, blending sounds, segmenting words into sounds. And this is different from teaching phonics because phonics instruction matches the sounds to print. So it is both auditory and visual, and the students are being taught which letters are associated with the sounds of language. So both skills are critical in early literacy instruction. Another area of immediate focus is utilizing decodable texts. And what are decodable texts? They are used in early reading instruction. They are carefully sequenced to accumulate the high frequency words and phonics that readers have been taught. They're designed to help readers apply the phonics they have been taught to decode with greater accuracy and independence. And they create, excuse me, a ramp into trade books. So in school year 21-22, we did purchase some of these decodable texts for K-2 classrooms. And during our professional development day, as Leslie mentioned, our literacy teams led school-based sessions on our K-2 for our K-2 staff on decodable text. So we connect our learning to the science of reading research and gave an overview of decodable text. Why do we use them and how do we use decodable text as an instructional tool? And currently we are in the process of purchasing more decodable text to use in our K-2 classrooms. So I really want to finish off by saying that I appreciate all of the hard work our literacy teams and K-2 staff is doing by making shifts to their instructional practices while fostering a love of reading for our students.
And if I could just jump in and say one thing that's really exciting is that there are some of our BEEP classrooms are piloting Haggerty as well. So that consistency, but starting with pre-K is so key. And so under Regina's former leadership and Margaret's leadership now, it's just some really exciting work. So, and thank you, Kristen. All right, so now into the bulk of our agenda. Our real focus is on the M-Class screener. And so today we want to talk about 3 things specifically. Why did we adopt a literacy screener and what is the benefit of that? The process for implementation, as well as what the initial beginning of year data is telling us and how we're responding to that. All right, so the importance of a universal screener for early literacy. Point blank, it's just to catch any difficulties that a student is having as early as possible and not wait until a student is struggling and frustrated. So that's really the gist here. The Massachusetts Dyslexia Guidelines state screening students for risk of dyslexia and other reading disabilities is one essential process in preventing reading difficulties. We're really excited. This is work that we started in September last year, and to see it come to fruition this year has been amazing. There certainly have been some bumps in the road. There certainly have been some lessons learned, but to have the screener implemented in a year's time, I think is incredible, and really a lot of the credit goes to our educators. Really all of the credit goes to our educators around this. Just their work on this, them being open, them giving us additional time. And I'm talking about both the classroom teachers as well as our literacy coaches and literacy specialists. One thing that's super exciting also about having the screener is that it provides us more up-to-date, consistent criteria referenced and reliable data. And that is really key when you're implementing MTSS, which is multi-tiered support system, and RTI, response to intervention. We use those terms pretty interchangeably. You need data to really understand where children are in the tiers. And so MClass is really providing that more real-time data, reliable data that we can then use to think about what students need. So really quickly, I don't know how many folks are familiar with the tiers related to MTSS or RTI, but here they are, with the general understanding that tier 1 is the instruction that every single student in the public schools of Brookline gets. And that's why that is the largest space on the triangle that represents all of our students. Then when we look at tier 2, these are students that may have additional needs, need additional targeted intervention, additional time. And the only way to know this is when you have a really solid screener or assessment that tells you what are a student's strengths and what are a student's areas for growth. And we call that progress monitoring. And that is done very frequently, usually beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of year. And there are some formative assessments we can use even in between those cycles. And then tier 3 is more customized. Sometimes tier 3 can mean specialized services, special education. So primarily, we're thinking about tier 1 and 2 at this point. So the process of choosing an early literacy screener. So this just outlines the timeline and some of the process. One of the pieces that I'm incredibly proud of are the number of educators that supported the work of selecting a screener. Our educators are the ones that need to carry out the work on the day-to-day, and so it's really important to have their voice. And we asked them for their help and their feedback, and they came through for us. And this was even during last, I know nobody wants to go back there, but during contract negotiations, when times were a little bit tense, our educators really came through and they said, regardless, we're really going to support this and let you know what we think we need to best serve students. So really quickly, DESE provided a list of screeners that were acceptable based on criteria that they selected. We reviewed that criteria really carefully to make sure that we were all on the same page. From the list of approved screeners, we picked several that we then did a deeper dive on. We reached out to the vendors. They came, they walked us through the screeners, where the screeners were in terms of implementation process. Some of the screeners were newer. Some have been around. Some, like MClass, have been around for a long time. And so that really gave us a sense of what the tool was, what it did, and what the strengths of the tool were. So next slide, Michelle. So we looked at several screeners, Dibble's M-Class, Early Bird, and iStation. This just gives you an idea of some of the feedback that we got from those screeners. This is a place, an example of where educator feedback is key. We had reached out to some community members to ask for their opinion on particular tools. One tool in particular, iStation, we had got some feedback from the community on. When we showed that screener to our teachers, they were not feeling it. And I think one of the things that came out of that was the screeners are implemented in very different ways. Some are one teacher to student one-to-one ratio and time. Others are students taking an assessment on a computer, and then the computer generates a list of what the strengths and areas of growth are for a child. iStation is one of those that is a computer-based test, and our educators were really clear with us. They didn't want that. They said, we want something where we're hearing children read to us, we're sitting across the table from a child, we're seeing them interact with the information. We want to see that teacher to student. And so what's really interesting is that you see the data in terms of how educators felt around iStation. And lo and behold, a couple of months later, DESE actually removed iStation from their approved list. So this is a place where educators were really clear with us with what they need, and that really corresponded to what the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education said needed to happen for students. So I know that there is a lot of anxiety around this topic. I know that people want us to move quickly, and I want us to move quickly, but I don't want to move quickly at the detriment to our students in terms of really understanding what the unintended consequences could be for any choice that we make. And so taking it slow, getting teacher feedback, absolutely key to this process. Next slide.
This just additional data.
Yep, additional data. So I won't read that, but you see M-Class just scored, above the top on this. And so we feel really good about the selection. Michelle's going to talk in a little while, just more specifically about the test. But I think that this was a great selection. And, again, there've been some bumps in the road in terms of professional development. We used a vendor, Amplify, who produces M-Class, I guess. We had used some of their trainers. Some of the trainers got high marks from our educators, some not so much. And so we made sure to give Amplify that feedback. But then one of the things I'm really proud of is that we quickly noticed we can do this professional development in-house. And so Kristen really took the reins, and she really brought the literacy specialists and coaches together, and they started to provide job-embedded school-based PD for educators around the tool. And that's when things really clicked. And so we're thinking about how to continue that work because I think that's where we get the most bang for our buck. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, and she's going to talk more about what is the M-Class screener.
Great, thank you. So the M-Class screener, it's a universal screener in compliance with the Massachusetts State Dyslexia Guidelines. I want to be really clear, it's predictive of outcomes for students. It is not a diagnostic test. So we would never give M-Class and say a student has a disability. What we would look at is we would screen students with M-Class and talk about what is their possibility of having poor outcomes in reading. And so DIBELS 8, which is where the M-Class is really the platform we use. DIBELS 8, which is what is given through M-Class, was developed at the University of Oregon, and it is constantly updated as the research develops. It was developed as the risk indicators in progress for overall reading, as well as dyslexia and other reading difficulties. So it has three principal uses. One is to identify students who may be at risk. The second is to use to document progress monitoring. So as Leslie talked about, as students receive interventions, how do we track how their progress is? And then it gives us a minimum level of reading, honest reading performance for a student. So we get data back around the student's reading, and it provides us with a starting point. I want to be also really clear. This is about tier 1 instruction. So the data that we're using here is primarily to support students at tier 1. And as I show you the data later, we will use other information to determine what challenges students have as they move along. Now, I also want to let you know that this is currently given in K through 2. The state is talking about adding grade 3, and this assessment goes up to grade 6. So I want to talk about how MClass is given. It's given with a set of subtests. So each of these subtests is very short. They're about 1 minute to 2 minutes per subtest. They also have what they call gating around them. So if a student is struggling, we don't let the student get to frustration. The system will cue us to stop assessing a student. At the same time, if a student is also progressing quickly through the assessment, it will move them, it'll bump them up to the next grade level. So it gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of how we're assessing the students. So I want to share with you that the literacy skills that are identified for the MClass testing is specifically designed to assess components of the early literacy, and those were determined by the National Reading Panel. So these identified skills come from a set of research initially to begin with. So what you'll see is one of the pieces is phonemic awareness. So phonemic awareness is the ability to hear and manipulate the smallest unit of sound in spoken language. Students are given a word and they're asked to verbally produce the individual phonemes. So in green, that's the phonemic segmentation fluency. Then we have the alphabetic principle, and those are in yellow, and that's phonics. So connecting letters with their sounds, and Leslie talked a little bit about that print aspect before and the sound, or actually Kristen did. And so when we talk about that, students are given a set of sounds. So what they do is they're given a set of nonsense words, and they have to pronounce the nonsense words based on the phonetics. And then they're given other words that are closer to real words, including words with irregular pronunciations. And then finally, they're given words connected to a text in a passage. Finally, fluency. So we have students read and determine how is the speed and accuracy, and that you'll see is the highlighted maze assessment. The maze is also created to assess low-level comprehension, because in some cases there'll be a missing word, student has to fill it in. And so all of these are administered at specific grade levels, and you'll see in the parentheses which grade levels take which assessments. And that's because as skills develop, certain skills will drop off of the assessment. And again, if we add the grade 3, that will also have a specific set of subtests. There's also the spelling subtest and the rapid automatized naming. And those are just additional assessments that we can give to determine student outcomes. If you'll see at the top, the letter naming fluency, that is for KM1, the highest assessment in terms of identifying risk, students who would be at risk. And you'll get to see that in a moment, how that works. So Leslie hit on the implementation, and I just want to bring up a couple of things here. So we set out a year's worth of implementation. And the first thing that meant was training teachers. So we did bring Amplify in on the first 2 days of school, and we had all teachers trained in K-2. Special educators came, English language teachers came. We did learn that professional learning was not quite enough to get teachers to feel comfortable to get this off the ground. So what we did was Kristen really mobilized her team and determined a partnership for every single classroom. So no teacher is administering the assessment on their own. In addition, she created a set of materials for each grade level that would walk teachers through the assessment and remind them how to administer and how to mark and score the testing. The other thing is that although the Amplify PD didn't quite serve our needs, they provided us with a ton of materials to use for practice. And so what Kristen did was make sure that teachers had access to all practice materials, which meant they could watch videos and practice scoring students. And then in addition to that, those partnerships are going to last through the year. So teachers and literacy specialists or coaches were able to get together and say, watch a student together, administer a student together, and both score it and see if they were aligned. Teachers were able to watch literacy staff give the assessment and then try on their own, et cetera. And we actually, on the closing date of the assessment, which was October 21st, we were able to provide, get every single child K-2 screened. And then the other thing that we've also done is really paid attention to the data. So we held I'll call it a loose formal data meeting in October. And the reason I call it loose and formal is that it was a formal data meeting and everybody across the district was set out to answer the same questions about their students, to dig into the data in using the same protocol. What was loose about it was this was our first time through. So we needed a baseline and we needed a place to start. But from what we learned, because all of us attended meetings at the different schools and they were held at the school level, is that teachers started to ask the right questions. Like how do I learn more about my student? What other questions do I need to ask? And so how can I adjust my tier 1 instruction? So we're getting there and we'll repeat the same process in January. So what I want to show you is just here's some feedback from the partnerships, and those partnerships again will continue. So every teacher has an individual that's assigned to them. So here's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the beginning of the year data and what it looks like. So this is just a few of the subtests that kindergarten would take, and this is our district data. And when you look at this at first glance, you look at it and you say, oh, 30% of our students are below benchmark or really below benchmark. That's sort of the difference between the yellow and the red in terms of their composite score. So the composite score is made up of all the subtests, and there's a formula that's used to determine where a student is in their composite score. And then you see at the bottom our risk factor. And so I want to be really clear. The numbers in the composite score, when I look at it, I'd say 30% of our students are below benchmark. However, the key to this assessment is the risk factor. So if you look down at the bottom, and I'll just move my mouse around here, 4% of our students in kindergarten are at risk, which means that if you looked at Leslie's pyramid, students that would immediately be seen at the top of the pyramid is 4%. And that's about correct. That's nationally what we should see. Now, that does not mean that those students have disabilities, and it doesn't mean that they need immediate intervention. What it means is that we need to be super intentional with those students around our tier 1 instruction. And they might become a group in the classroom. They might receive a double dose of foundations. It really depends on where they landed, and we would dig down deeper because you can get at the specific data by student. These scores above, we are not rushing to make groups of students that are going to intervention. That is a very normalized scoring because the skills develop throughout the school year. So If we get to the second assessment, which will be in January, and we see the same students landing in that bucket, then we need to do some reflection and some support of students. But right now, this is our baseline. And the goal is for those reds to slowly become green, those red and yellow, to slowly become green and blue throughout the year. But we wouldn't expect it at the beginning of the year. Same thing with grade 1, except that grade 1, we saw that there was an 11% risk factor. Now, I didn't put in the other subtests here because it's the same. I put in the composite score. So again, we have a group of students who are below benchmark, and we also have a group, 11% of students who are at risk. A couple of things play out in first grade. Kindergarten is not compulsory in Massachusetts. Therefore, 11% when we started to look of the students that are in this bucket were not actually in our district last year. They may or may not have gone to kindergarten or preschool, and we would have to dig down further. So that's one piece that we're going to continue to look at. The second piece there is that we will look at where these students were, what they experienced, and take a look at the tier 1 instruction. So this gives us information for several areas. If that number stays high, then we have to do some deeper looking into what did the students come with, what was their experience in the past.
Wait,
And then,
Michelle, sorry,
sure.
can you just explain what's the correlation between the risk indicator and the composite score in this slide?
So the risk, okay, so the composite score, it's the same as kindergarten. So again, these are beginning of the year. So what you'll see is if I went back here, not every assessment goes through kindergarten and first grade and second grade. So the composite score is made up of performance on those skills. But what the composite score doesn't take into account is where should students be at the end of the year. So when they create the composite score versus the risk, the risk factor comes from a subset of the subtests. And then the composite score is just, where are you today? So when we said like one of the uses of this is to indicate an initial level, that's what it's doing. And so are we going to look at the students in red and yellow? Of course. Are we going to look at where they're grouped in the classroom? Of course. But they are not automatically put into interventions. And we'll get to that in a moment. Yeah, Kristen.
I say something too, just for clarification at risk. The risk factor is calculated by a well below composite score, and the student would be in well below. There's 2 subtests, either spelling or RAN. So if a student was well below in spelling or RAN subtest, one of those, and had a well below composite score, they would be tagged at risk.
But you could be red in composite score, but not
correct, because your red was brought down by the other subtests.
Mm-hmm.
So this is at each grade level, there are specific subtests that identify which area is risk, and RAN is always there. And then in first grade and second grade, they have, like Kristen said, it was the spelling. In in second grade is.
And I'll just talk a little bit about spelling, like our next round for middle of the year. I don't know if this is going rogue or not, but we're probably not going to do the spelling subtest. So I really want to take this with a grain of salt in a way. Like I want to see more what the data looks like in January if we just do RAN, because the spelling subtest was on the computer and the kids had to use the trackpad. And if they made a mistake, which they were trying really, really hard because I administered these subtests as well, they would have to, the thing would delete all of the work that they had done and they would have to start over again. So the amount of work that these students were doing to try to spell these words some of them were way beyond beginning of, a lot of them were way beyond first grade. So that's why I feel like it could skew some of this information.
And to be really clear, the spelling was not, so we opened up every subtest possible for this first round. And the spelling is one of the subtests that was optional, and we decided to try it because we had access to it and wanted to really look at what the data looked like. So to Kristen's point, we think that the assessment itself may have been a challenge for students to take, and it is not the key factor in identifying a student at risk. Helen and Mariah, did you have questions?
I did. I had a quick one.
Sure.
Because I'm not sure they're the same kids. You say 11% of the kids didn't attend Brookline kindergarten. Is that the same 11%?
No, not necessarily. I didn't lay them on top of each other. I could, but I didn't lay them on top of each other. But 11% of students coming in with potentially either no kindergarten or preschool or not in Brookline means that it's hard to look at what we provided for them. So to Kristen's point, I think we're going to remove the second subtest, and we're going to look at the students and see who's still in the bucket next time.
So when you're looking at them, if it's possible, and I think it would be interesting, probably important, if we could look at those kids who were in BEEP and how many ended up at risk or in other, daycares or whatever.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm a real data person. So my inclination before thinking about today was to dig really deep. And I don't think we're there yet. I think we need 2 sets of data to dig deeply into, and then the third set at the end of the year. But I absolutely, so one of the things we can do is student profiles have a lot of information in it. It has whether English is your home language or English is you're an English learner. It has, have you ever been screened as it for, it has, are you learning disabled, or, do you have a learning disability? Do you have some other type of disability? It's all captured within this system. And so we can dig even a little further, and we probably can then disaggregate students by students that went to BEEP and students who and stayed in the district and students who didn't. And as Leslie pointed out, like we've now also put Haggerty into BEEP. So as Haggerty is being done, Haggerty into BEEP. So as Haggerty is coming up in BEEP, we're going to have the opportunity to see students who had a different foundation coming in. So next year's kindergarten first assessment will be interesting. And the other thing we also learned was that we probably have to shift our kindergarten window a little bit for next year, because we may have done it too early in terms, but having 4%, but I think what it'll do is change that 30% in the composite of being below and far below benchmark.
Sure. And I'll harp on the same thing that I think I've asked a number of times to find out if there's dyslexia in the family.
So we've talked about that, and we needed to go back and ask Megan if that had been added to the entrance interview. I can't remember. Leslie, do you have a?
Yeah. Well, one of the places, we are mandated by law to do a kindergarten screener, and that involves getting information from the family. And so we're going to ask that information in that venue, at least starting in kindergarten, and we'll think about also how to do that for some of the upper grades.
That would be great.
And one other thing,
and BEEP, you should do it in BEEP too, if we're doing it.
Yeah. One of the things also that I didn't talk about, but within a student, you can also drill down to their specific responses on this. So you can actually get to, like, if there are particular areas within each of the subtests that they find a challenge, then we can see that.
Okay.
Mariah, did you have a question?
I do. I want to get a little bit more clarity. So if I understand it right, the composite score is sort of their current place, and then their risk indicator is like predictive of where they're going to end up the year. Is that accurate?
Not predictive of where they're going to end up in the year, predictive of if we don't take a look at their profile as a student and we don't sort of address that, but again, at tier 1 instruction, that they're at risk for having poor outcomes in reading. That poor outcome could include a reading disability, but it is not diagnostic that a student has it. So the students who are at risk, we do look at immediately. but it doesn't mean they go to intervention. It means that we address it. We begin by addressing it in tier 1. And what's really nice about this data is that because you can use it to progress monitor, so you can give it to students again and again, but our specific windows are for aggregating data purposes. This can go to CST. This can be part of that RTI model, so that if a teacher has students at risk and they're working with them in the classroom, and then again, the same students come back, then you take them to CST and you look at what's the next level of support for that student. It doesn't mean that they're headed for an evaluation.
So what does it mean that a student's in red in the 20, I think it's 21%.
Right now, that they're
yeah.
below the benchmark. However, what it doesn't show is where were they last year? So a student can be below the benchmark, but have made great strides last year and be moving in their instruction. So that's why it isn't, there's a sense of urgency to support the student in the classroom, but it doesn't light us up as, oh my gosh, this student is below benchmark at the beginning of the year. What it says is we've got to keep working.
Yeah, I think at this time, especially the beginning of year data, Mariah, it's more formative. So it tells us the students who have the most work to do to get to benchmark. But if you think about our youngest learners, like one of the assessments is around, identifying letters and sounds. Well, if you're in kindergarten, maybe you haven't had exposure to that yet. I mean, we're in, the beginning of November. And so we don't know, instruction is just starting. If they haven't had prior schooling, they may not have had access to that teaching and learning. And so that just tells us that they need it. They need it at tier 1. Let's make sure that they get it. And then let's reassess to see if they're actually learning what we're teaching. So I think that's a good way to think about the red, is that some students haven't had access to the teaching at this point in the school year. And so it'll be really interesting to look at that middle of year assessment as well as the end of year assessment.
And some of the students were assessed at the very beginning of October. So they had been here like 3 weeks, just as a benchmark for us to understand.
And some were English language learners, I imagine.
Yes, we did not. Yes, any student that had a proficiency level of 3 or above were assessed. So we assessed everybody, and we're working with the English language department to understand, like, what does this mean for English language learners? Who should take it? When should they take it? And how do we use that data? So again, but see, here's the encouraging part. Our second graders were at 6%. And this is after 2 years plus a little bit of instruction within the district. And so that 6% makes sense. Nationally, it makes sense. And then the idea that now we have only 23% of our students in second grade are below benchmark. So we need to take that into account as well. And, students take different amounts of time to develop. So
I'm sorry, Michelle, could I just jump in and say,
Sure.
I think one of the big question marks with the screener was everybody was on pins and needles, like, what is this data going to yield? Is it going to tell us that, 70% of children, could potentially be at risk? We just didn't know. And so people said, well, what's the plan? What's the plan? Well, we don't know what the plan is until we see what the data tells us. And then we'll make a plan based on the data. So, it was a sigh of relief that these numbers really replicate what we would see in a tiered system. They're not outliers. They're very much the norm. And we can also get our arms around this. We are very fortunate to be in Brookline, where we have coaches, we have interventionists. We can think about how to address these students who are at risk. It's not an unmanageable number. We need to pay attention to it, and we can pay attention to it. Now, that doesn't mean next year the numbers won't look different, but we're in this current year and looking at this data, we certainly have the resources to think about what we need to do for the children who aren't at benchmark, and certainly the children who are at risk.
And what we learned when we had our data meetings is we only got surprised by a handful of students. The rest we were well aware of already. And part of that comes from the kindergarten screening. Part of it comes from their experience in the schools. And again, we have to look at where did they start last year and where are they getting to now? So in thinking about that, just a couple of things. We're supporting teachers with the tier 1 instruction so that students that are identified at risk are recognized in the classroom and thought about like their grouping, et cetera. As Kristen and Leslie talked about at the beginning, we're really, within those shifts, we're looking at teachers in the implementation of Haggerty and phonemic awareness, and also purchasing decodable texts. And what was so great about the PD day that Kristen and her team shared, so again, that was PD that was held at each school, was that they talked about the difference between decodable texts and other and leveled books, leveled readers, so that teachers really had the understanding of, when I use a decodable text, this is what I'm doing. And when I use a leveled reader, this is what I'm doing. And then again, these data meetings took place in October. They'll happen again in January and then again in June. And so we're constantly monitoring student progress throughout this system. We were asked to kind of provide a little bit more information on the cost. So I did add this in, and I'll send the slides back to Robin so that you have this as well. So the teacher materials, the initial investment was just around $5,500 for all the materials that were purchased. And we made sure that we had materials for every single teacher has their own classroom kit, and then additional kits for the literacy specialists to use in the school. We purchased a 3-year subscription. So we have this until FY25 through FY25, school year 25. After that, we're going to have to renew that license. I did not look at the trend to see if there's a huge difference in price. Training for all teachers, $6,700, but then there's also all that additional time that Kristen's team has put into the work. And they've also offered several sessions after school and on Fridays during collab time as options for teachers to attend. And then many of the literacy specialists did things at the school level. And then, so our 3-year total all in is about $74,000. A couple of things just to note, just as you're thinking about budgeting, the initial funding came through IDEA this was part of our decision in mitigation of the disproportionality. So when we had that finding, this was one of the things that we already knew the state was coming through with this, and we knew it was important to identify those students at risk quite early. And then one thing to keep in mind for next year is that grade 3 may be added by the state. And so we'll need to consider what does that mean for cost. And then that's the end. So I'm going to stop sharing so that questions can be.
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, thank you all for that excellent presentation. I guess my question is, so you mentioned several times that what we were seeing in Brookline was not that surprising in the national context. Is there more you can say about sort of how we are looking relative to other districts that use this system? And also, do you have a sense of how much this is measuring prior preparation as opposed to sort of inherent neurological risk factors?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. The first is these statistics, I did some high level look very similar to statistics coming out of other districts. And again, this is our first. So several of the other districts, though, have been using this for a while. So they're tracking students over years' time. And this is our first foray into it. So I would rather actually take a look at what our data looks like at the January, when our teachers have had the opportunity to get used to administering, and come back and look at that, but we will, and we're happy to do that. In terms of how it's measuring, so it's a criterion reference test that has been And I'm happy to send you the research data on it because I think that would make more sense than looking at it, than talking about it. But one of the things that they do is they look at students across the entire country and compare performance in order to get the benchmarks. But it's the piece of that's criterion referenced is it is based on how you perform on each skill. And so that's super important because that's what's going to drive our classroom instruction. In terms of the neurological piece, so yes, dyslexia is a biological issue. And when you have a dyslexia diagnosis, that sticks with you. It's not like when you're an English language learner and you learn to speak English and then you are a former English language learner. So that is not assessed through this assessment. It can't be. If a student is at high risk or at risk, and we take steps to mitigate the risk, and it's still a problem, the student would go into a CST process where they may eventually go into assessments that are more appropriate for determining neurological issue or a biological issue.
It's just very interesting if our numbers are similar to those of districts with very different socioeconomic or demographic profiles, right? That would make it kind of unusual
I see
for an
what you're saying.
educational assessment.
Yeah, no.
Right.
I totally see what you're saying.
Well,
I totally see what you're saying.
And I can tell you, Andy, so there are districts that have been implementing MClass for a long time. Boston Public Schools has implemented MClass for at least 15 years. And so I remember my time there, the data looked very different. So, the data look very different.
A related question that I have, so for kindergartners, it seems that the at-risk figure is 4%, for first graders 11%, for second graders 6%. Can you explain how where's the cutoff and how is it that you determine who's at risk and who's not? Is there a particular data point or how's that determined?
So we don't determine that. That is determined through the system, and the system is set to determine it based on looking at students' data for years and years. Like as Leslie said, like I was looking at the research back from 2000, but Dibbles was already in place by then. So what they've done is look at student performance over years and determine like students who are at risk struggle in these areas. And Kristen, more eloquently than I did, talked about the specific subtests. So like, is it RAN that's specific to like the youngest kids' risk? I'm trying to get back to my notes.
Yeah, so it's a combination of how students are determined if they're at risk is that the student has a composite score, the total score of well below, plus either a well below score either in spelling or RAN.
Right. But it's not, you can have a low, sorry,
did that answer your question?
It does. I'm just wondering though, is there any thought about having sort of our own risk assessment scenario, or are we just using national indicators?
I think we need to use the national because that's the research base there. And I mean, Matt Dubois, he actually did his dissertation around this. And so he was super helpful in the need to look at the national norming and understanding that. And he has sent some articles, which again, I'm happy to share any of those research articles with you. But it is this is a good way for us to look across the district and to consider how our students are performing in general to other readers.
How are these results shared with parents and caregivers, and at what point?
So there is a parent report, and what we are not sending out the parent report wholesale right now. What we've asked is that, and teachers have been informed about this, is that if families want access to the parent report, they're more than welcome to come in or do a Zoom meeting with a teacher to walk through what the report means, because we don't want to send a report that's not explained, especially in this first system. I think our goal is to eventually be able to send those parent reports home. They could be used at conferences. All teachers had access to them at conferences, and they are a great conference tool to really talk about, like, here are strengths and here are areas that we're working on, and here are ones that will develop by the end of the year. And here are things that if you want to be doing some additional work with your student at home, absolutely.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned that these screenings are not intended to be diagnostic, but predictive. Nevertheless, do you see any correlation with students who have specific learning disabilities in reading for these grade levels in terms of those percentages?
I want to make sure we understand the question. So,
So for instance, the at-risk level for kindergarten was 4%. Do
Yep.
you see a correlation between that figure and the number of kindergartners in special education with a specific learning disability of reading?
So I would
You
say
know-
that we are still gathering that data because, again, this was the first. We need to wait. I believe we need to wait until at least the January administration, because one of the things that we learned, like for instance with kindergarten, we may have assessed on an early window this year. We've already started talking about pushing that window up for next year, and so we really. I'm going to say right now, we will look into that, but we do not have that data yet. I would say
Yeah, we
after the
haven't.
January.
At least I haven't even tried to make that correlation.
Yeah, I think January.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to open it up to questions from others. Mariah?
Thanks. I want to ask one follow-up on one you just asked and then two other questions. So the follow-up is, in the national data, is there a correlation between the risk factor and disability?
In terms of the number of students, like, is it 4% of students at risk that wind up with 4% of disability, that those 4% wind up as with a
Or that
disability?
there is any greater, we'll say, correlation between students identified with risk factor who are ultimately determined to have a disability?
Yes, I think that's what their entire system is about. I wouldn't say all 4% will wind up with a disability, but what they have learned is that students at risk are the ones who eventually go into an evaluation.
Right, if it
Okay.
helps, between 3 and 17% of students are diagnosed with dyslexia or on the dyslexia spectrum. And typically, even though it's not an official diagnostic category, I think the rough estimate is around 10% of the US population is assumed to have some kind of dyslexia. I'm sure Kristen or Michelle, you probably have more accurate data, but that's typically what I've heard.
Thank you. My second question is, going back to what you said, Michelle, about parent access. Can you clarify how parents access? They have to come in? Like, that seems
Or they can
very,
set up a Zoom meeting or a call with a teacher. We don't want to send it home without a conversation right now because it's the first time.
okay.
It's the
But
first
so
time.
are
and
teachers ready? Are teachers like willing and ready to do those one-on-one meetings with parents above and
Yeah,
beyond the parent-teacher conferences?
Yeah,
Kristen,
that's
you
a
wanna
great
address
question. Yeah, so I'll talk about that a little bit. So we are having teachers, we have the partnerships with literacy coaches and specialists. So they are going to work with teachers to make sure that they feel comfortable having those conversations and able to have conversations with parents. But again, this is really our first time administering the test, the assessment. And there is a learning curve. Like, I was looking at some of the stuff, even when I was doing it, I'm like, I had somebody, co-doing it with me, a psych intern, and was doing the nonsense word for frequency or whatever, fluency, sorry, it's past my bedtime. And I was so thankful that she was doing it. I was like the kid, I was like, oh, stop. But she was marking it down. So I was able to go back and fix it. But we're all learning this right now for the first time. And I have been in conversation with Desi, with the person that has been working on the universal screeners, and having meetings with her and talking about it. And it's been really refreshing talking to her, because just reminding us that this is a year that we're learning the tool, and we are learning how it works. We're learning what the data is telling us. We're learning how we're going to move forward with using the data with our students. So this really is a year for us to do learning, and I really feel confident that next school year, a lot of our questions and wonderings as a literacy team and an ELA department and an OTL will be answered, and we'll have more, we're going to come up with a protocol with how we're going to share it with parents. Because I just shared the story of like where my daughter was last year. We were just sent home her report with no explanation, nothing. And she was, it was like 30% chance of reaching, outcome. And for me, with a literacy background, my heart dropped, and I was like, my heart was pounding. And I don't want that to happen to our parents. I don't think it raises an unnecessary concern. And I want them to have a conversation with our classroom teachers and with our literacy specialists so that we can explain to them what this means, so that they aren't getting misinformation, and they're getting it from the source, right? From our educators. And that's really what we are trying to do as a team, to make sure that we have an open communication with parents.
And Kristen,
Thank you.
one thing, Kristen, also to add to what you're saying is, if we had a severe concern about a student that we gathered from any of this data, the family would hear from us immediately. So we're not holding back anything from families in terms of what we learned. And we also only came up with a handful of students that surprised us, which was what we hoped would happen. But as Leslie said, we did not have any idea what we would see.
And
Yeah.
that's why I'm thankful that we are doing this screener, because I really feel like it's giving us another opportunity to make sure that we're casting a wide net, and we're making sure that we're paying attention to all of our students.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you both.
Stephen?
Wait,
sorry.
I got one
Go
more
ahead, Mariah.
question. Last one, I promise. Could you comment? You mentioned earlier, sorry, I just had a total momentary lapse. Give me 3 seconds to bring back my brain to where I was. It was about this was, Kristen, you mentioned earlier on the spelling test that this was the test given electronically, and that students were having challenges with that. I was wondering if you could just talk about this kind of like a computer-based test, or whatever it is, tablet-based test, in sort of its appropriateness for especially younger students to be able to capture their literacy. Whether the medium, I guess, itself is interfering.
Yeah, that's why
whether or
I
not the
wasn't a big,
computers.
yeah, exactly right. That's why I wasn't actually I'm glad we tried it. That is why I didn't really love the spelling assessment. I mean, we do some spelling assessment with foundations. And I didn't really, when I was watching the kids, especially for first grade is when they first started. And then they did it in first and second grade. And I could tell, I did it both with first graders and second graders. The second graders were more, like a lot of these kids, they didn't have, any instruction really of like how to use the trackpad. So it was like basically using like, that they've done some kind of work on their parents' phone, or, on their computer or iPad. And, they were all like, they were so adorable and so like ready and willing to do it. But, I was getting frustrated for them. Like, they're like, we can't use they couldn't use the keypad. Like, they had to like use the cursor and point to the actual letter. And so I was like, oh, why are they doing this to you? So I was getting frustrated for them, but I was hiding it, yeah, I just didn't really love that. I felt like there was something else that we could be doing. I think Rayan was really helpful. I really liked that subtest, and that is something that we will continue to do in obviously in kindergarten, first and second.
And Mariah, I think one of the pieces is that this assessment was different from the one that I was sharing about iStation, where that was totally computer-based, where there was really no interaction with the teacher. It's the child and a computer, and then you get a report, a data report. This is still, the educator is still present. One thing we definitely heard loud and clear from educators is that it would be easier to give this assessment on an iPad, a tablet, or even a phone, that because it's not touch screen, they're using the mouse, they're using the trackpad. So that is something we have to have a further discussion about, is about the way in which we give the assessment. Do we want to look into iPads? A more cost prohibitive model might be to use, you can also use iPhones for this, but I think we do want to think about something that is touch screen. I mean, even for my daughter who is in 5th grade, it's interesting. She's so used to the iPad that sometimes she comes to my computer and she tries to touch the screen. And I'm like, Layla, the mouse, the trackpad, come on. So, and that is, so that's an issue. And the teachers, you know, they didn't hold back. They let us know that they would prefer to do this on something that is a touch screen. So we do need to have that conversation and think about that.
And
That's a definite switch for us, because usually we've always assessed using paper pencil. I don't know. I mean, this is, again, I'm just trying to be funny. If you ever watched Abbott Elementary, like some good Joy, I highly recommend. In season 1, they have an episode that's all about where the teachers get a new assessment that's computerized. And so I went through all those emotions, and a lot of our staff did. But I'm glad we did it. And it was really amazing to have the data compiled right for us immediately. That was really great.
And we did send a survey out to teachers where we got a ton of feedback about their experience. So asking them about their training, et cetera. And so we'll use that to guide like what supports we need, whether it be technology or whatever, going into the next year.
I'll go, Stephen.
Thank you, David. I have 2 quick questions and hopefully a very short comment. I think you've heard me say enough about literacy for a while, Leslie. First, I just want to say, Leslie, you spoke at the beginning about making sure that the Office of Teaching and Learning followed a deliberate process to making a shift in the screener. And I just want to praise your office for the process you followed and the results you achieved. I don't see it as slow either. I think the fact that you came to this result in a year is great. I think the fact that you got 100% enthusiasm from the teachers who participated is great. I think the fact that we arrived at Dibbles, which is very much evidence aligned and is a major step forward for the district, is great. I think everyone is on board with this result. So I just want to start by praising the result that you achieved in this process. So thank you for doing that. And that goes to you too, Michelle, and to you too, Kristen, for the role that you all played in doing this. I think that's a major achievement for OTL. Thank you. I want to, so the first question has to actually do with the screener. I would like to know how we might get regular updates from Dibbles. How might the office feed back the results of Dibbles to us? What kind of reporting mechanism might there be?
It's easy to do reports, but sorry, Leslie, go ahead.
To the school committee, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think with every test administration, a good venue for sharing the results would be in our curriculum subcommittee meetings. So then the subcommittee can see the trajectory from beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year, and compare throughout that time. So I think that would be a good place to start. And then having some conversations with the subcommittee around at what point do you want to bring it back to full committee to share more widely.
Then I would love to, with Jennifer's, that I'd love to request to you, Jennifer, to have that be a regular feature of the subcommittee.
Yep, definitely.
Can I, just to clarify, then there would be 2 major data collection points, middle of year and end of year.
Coming up, yes.
Okay, you said, I just wanted to be like, all right, it won't be like a monthly thing. They won't have data that
Every week,
often,
Jennifer,
but,
every week I'm gonna.
okay, I'm like,
Okay.
it'll be really interesting to see, to that point, to look at the data and compare beginning of the year, and the middle of MOI and in the end of the year. So will be interesting.
Yeah.
And I have it down.
Okay, my second question is, so what becomes now of the BOSS? Are we going to use it at all as a screener? Are we going to use it at all as a progress assessment tool?
Yep, so that's a really good question. So in K-2, we've put it on hold for the sheer fact that the K-2 teachers were learning about the M-Class screener. And, certainly an issue with BAS is the amount of time. It is extremely time consuming, and that's been a challenge. It's interesting. I just, a teacher from Pierce was texting me during this meeting and just saying, oh, we ended up doing the BAS just to get more information on our students. And so I think one of the things is really separating the 3 queuing system, which Kristen, you can talk more about this, but separating the 3 queuing system and the levels from what it tells us when we're sitting across the table from a child and having them read to us. I think that, and the comprehension piece. The bigger question is, what are we going to do in grades 3 to 5? Because all they have is BAS. And so I'm really hesitant just to yank that. It's not that I understand the concerns with BAS. And I'm trying to find a healthy balance between leaving them assessmentless, but then also taking the time to do a process that we've done with the M-Class, where teachers get to weigh in and find an assessment that's going to give us evidence, criterion-based results, and be accurate. So that's, Stephen, I don't have an answer for you, but that is the conversation of the day.
Okay, but can just even like anecdotally, what do teachers gain? I would even, Helen, I'd love to hear your opinion on this too. Like, what are teachers gaining from the BAS as an assessment tool from 3 to 5 that they don't gain from like an off-the-shelf tool, or that they don't gain from just an informal assessment of their own choosing? Like, what is, I mean, given how many concerns there are around the validity of the BAS, what is it that they feel that they are gaining?
Well, I think
I'm asking out of genuine curiosity.
Yeah, and I don't want to answer for all the teachers, but I'm just going to speak for my experience when I was teaching and implemented the BAS or the DRA, which is like the BAS. It was just the opportunity to see how children handle books, to hear them read to me, to listen to just their fluency. And then also the comprehension piece was really helpful. Now, the one thing is M-Class does go through 5th grade. So that might be something that we want to think about. But I also want to make sure that if there's something that teachers feel they're getting from BAS, they can get it through another tool. And I'm just hesitant to leave them assessmentless. I mean, and so that's really that's the problem of practice. And I hear the concern out there, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm forsaking children's literacy advancement, or that I'm saying, oh yeah, we can just wait and chill and see what happens. That's not at all what I'm saying. I just want to be purposeful about what we're doing. And so I think that's the piece that's getting lost in translation, where we're hearing the community saying we're doing things haphazard. No, we're not. We're being really thoughtful. If we were to yank this, that would be haphazard. That would be problematic. And a great example is what happened with Think Math. And so, yeah, I don't have an answer.
Okay.
It's next on the agenda to think about that. But I think there are some good options out there, and we just need to get teachers and the community engaged in what the possibilities are.
Okay. So
I can tell you a little something too, if you want.
Sure.
I don't know.
Please.
Like, I won't go into too much detail, but the queuing system that people are talking about is only one part, like small part of the BAS. And you, like, quite frankly, you don't have to analyze it if you don't want to, right? There was a lot of flexibility. It's really giving us an accuracy rate so that we see where students are, if it's their independent, instructional, or hard level, and the combination with their accuracy rate and their comprehension. So this is where I feel like the M-Class screener is showing us some early literacy foundational skills, and it's assessing that. The BAS is not assessing for that. It's never tried, and it's never been a part of that assessment. I really feel like the strength of the BAS is the comprehension piece, quite frankly, because you're looking at comprehension within the text, beyond the text, and about the text.
So
And
the
within-
BAS is helping teachers know whether students are comprehending the text.
Mhm, exactly. So like the within the text, and this is where I think, we want to, decoding, very important. There's another piece that has been missing in the podcast that I've heard is comprehension. You need decoding and comprehension to read. If you're only looking at decoding, you're going to have a problem later on with comprehension. We do not want that for our students. Give me a child that has a harder time decoding rather than comprehending. It's much easier as a practitioner, as a literacy specialist where I started out as, it's much easier to remediate and work with students that have a issue with decoding than comprehension. It really is, it is. But we want to make sure that we're doing both for students. And the comprehension within is just answering some literal questions, summarizing the story. Beyond the text is thinking about inferential thinking, making connections, synthesizing your information. And about the text is thinking critically about the text. What kind of genre is it? Why did the author choose to use this? Like these descriptive words, how did that help you as a reader? In nonfiction text, you want to think about like question if the validity of the author's sources. So there's all these different aspects of comprehension that the M-Class is not assessing.
Not looking at, sure.
And I think that you're going to see like here from different teachers, some of them are saying, I don't want to do the BAS. There's others that say, I need that and I want that as well. I want to do both. And
sure, I wasn't arguing that the M-Class.
No, I'm not arguing.
Yeah.
No, Stephen, I'm not trying to argue.
Okay.
I don't think you are either. I just wanted to just say a little bit more about, it's not only a queuing system, but it's not measuring that.
Right.
That
actually is a great segue to what I would like to make a brief comment about this. The way this conversation, the way Leslie, the way you set this up, you talked a bit about phonics at the beginning. And I think I actually found the public comments very useful and very compelling. But as you know, one of my daughters is dyslexic, and I found Emily Hemford's journalism very useful in helping me retroactively construct a narrative as to what happened to my family when we encountered major difficulties in her schooling that led to a loss of confidence and a cratering of her self-esteem as a learner. And I think what the public comments were calling for was not an addition of phonics to our curriculum, which I think we're doing well. And I think Hegarty is an example of how we're adding phonics to the curriculum. But I think they're trying to call attention to the importance of making sure that all of our literacy instruction is evidence-based. And whenever our literacy curriculum is, to the best of our knowledge, not evidence-based, we should take a serious look at stripping it away from our curriculum entirely. And to the extent that we don't know what to replace it with, that's where I completely agree with you, Leslie, that we should take our time finding the right alternative to it. And I continue to completely support having OTL set the right timeline and process for making sure we have that right when we make that shift, if indeed that is the shift we want to make. But I wholeheartedly endorse making a key principle of this work, making sure our literacy curriculum is evidence-based. I think everyone agrees that phonics is part of it. Everyone on all sides of this is part of it. And so is reading comprehension. I don't think there's any actual disagreement that these are all parts of it. I mean, I think the people who are strongly aligned with Emily Hanford and who are really opposed to Lucy Calkins don't think that the balanced literacy pedagogy is doing a great job right now. And I think the opposite is true, vice versa is true as well. My point though is just to make sure that we're paying strong evidence to the evidence. And the reason for that is because that's the only way to ensure that we're doing what's right for the kids. If we're just saying, like, what do teachers feel most comfortable with? What is the curriculum that's preferred by this or that person? Then we're not really doing what's right for the kids. The way we can ensure we're doing, I'm just repeating myself. This is the soapbox I wanted to get on and preach for just a moment. So I'm going to get off of it now. The only thing I wanted to say in addition to this is I think the context for this whole conversation is that there is a sea change happening across the state. I talked today with the head of the Center for Instructional Support for DESE, and she told me that there were 71 applications just last year alone for the ARPA money for changes to core instructional support and literacy, and she awarded something like $9 million to 60 districts who were making changes to their literacy curriculum. And a lot of it was moving away from F&P and Calkins to science of literacy related texts, curriculum, content. And the lists of alternative curriculum are on DESE's website, so we don't need even a consultancy to come up with those alternative lists. It's on that webpage called Curate on DESE's website. And we know, for instance, that like Holyoke and Lindale are using like the ARC curriculum, ARC core, and other districts are using what's it called? I wrote it down. It's like Wit and Wisdom or something like that. They're all out there. We don't have to do our own research. So I think it's a matter of OTL doing its own review and figuring out what's the right fit for Brookline. And that is a process that OTL could determine how long it should take, what are the resources that it will require, that set the timeline and execute it.
Yep.
According to the timeline that it should take. But I think we should commit to doing it. I think that's the urgency I feel. I think we should commit to doing that kind of work. I'll stop. Thank you for listening.
No, I totally agree with that, Stephen. And we are going to look more closely at our materials and curriculum. And that's why we wrote into the Title I grant funding for a literacy review. And so what, the next steps with that will be that, the RFP process, because this will be costly. And the RFP process, we're going to really take the remainder of this year. Michelle will really lead that and get an RFP out. So that we can get some capacity to help us just to get feedback around what teachers need, what they want, what students need. So we're committed to looking at that. I mean, Calkins, there's issues with it. And so we're not denying that. What we're trying to be is intentional about the shift. And while we still have Calkins in place, that's the work that Kristen's doing around shifting the balance to make sure that those pieces of Calkins that we just now know are not good practice, that we're mitigating that. There are pieces of Calkins that are good. They're good for teaching students about complex texts, et cetera. But, we want to see, I don't know if we'll stick with Calkins or not. It's well, I won't go there, but we need to look at it and we need to think about what curriculum is going to come next because things happen, right? Like there's a district that got a curriculum and then they found out there was some biased material in there. And so I just don't want to go get something and then have a problem, maybe even bigger than what we're dealing with. And so it's just about the timing, being thoughtful, and full transparency. What I take issue with some of the rhetoric out there is around when people are using words like haphazard, when they're using saying that we're hurting children. That I take that personally. I'm a mom. I'm a teacher. I'm not going to have that under my watch, and so that's highly problematic. And when someone comes and says, get this assessment out of here right away, we don't do anything right away. We're going to be thoughtful. We're going to think about it. We're going to get our ducks in a row, and then we're going to do what we need to do. But that is really, and so hearing that you're supporting us with a timeline, and that doesn't mean we can take forever, but that you're giving us time to do the work in a really thoughtful manner, that means a lot. So I really appreciate that. And we are doing our due diligence. We are listening to the research. I'm talking to my peers in Wellesley, in Newton, to hear, how they're in the same spot that we are. And so we're all just, trying to collaborate around this.
Yeah, I guess just to sum it up, I would like to say I endorse OTL fully leading this process, But I would also like to urge our a commitment to ensuring that we have evidence-aligned curriculum, and where we find that our curriculum is out of alignment with the evidence, that we commit to stripping it away from our schools. So if we find that F&P and Calkins really is out of alignment with good practices, or out of alignment with the evidence about how students learn to read, that we commit to taking it away from the kids.
Agreed.
Thanks very much.
Agreed. Yep. There it is.
Suzanne?
Yeah, thank you, David. And thank you for the presentation very much. I had a couple of questions, some around costs. Does it cost us for subs when we do this testing and assessment?
No, because the best way to do this test is by teacher and student, and there are ways to do subtests as groups. And so this test takes very little time. And so we do not bring in subs. We use our partner literacy specialist or coach to come in and do it with us. So we didn't use any subs.
Okay, great. So another area of cost though is, so I know you've taken a lot of time this year and some last year to get the teachers ready for the tests. The next step I would think might be helping teachers through professional development understand what to do with those test results.
Yes.
So it's enough to identify the students as a risk or in a week or lower the benchmark, but what do they do then to, once we've identified the students, what do we do next to get that instruction? So I know that's another big effort, but I'm just wondering if that's on the plan somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So this year, our goal was to do the assessment and to read the data and to understand the data. And Kristen's team, and I can let her speak to that, but they've been working really hard to say, like, what are the next steps based on the data? And also, like, it's a reflection tool for our tier one. So it is more, it's valuable data from everywhere. And Kristen, do you have anything, do you want to add to that, is on the what we do with the data? I mean,
Yeah, that's what I had
Yeah.
said earlier, that we, this year is a learning year. So we are going to take a look at what we only have one set of data points to look at right now. I really want to see what the middle of the year looks like. And we are going to make decisions based on intervention and what that looks like based on data from middle of the year.
Yeah, and Suzanne, you mentioned cost, so I just want to make sure we're answering. So in terms of cost, you mean like for additional material to support students?
No, I was thinking specifically about cost of professional development.
So this year, we asked principals to give us 3 of their faculty meetings to use for these data meetings. We have to think about the professional development because in terms of cost, we have the internal capacity for it. It's about getting the time with the teachers.
Okay, thanks. And then the one other area that I'm really fuzzy on, I'm just struggling with so much, and that is, and you've talked about it, sharing with families, but what I'm thinking about in particular is it's so hard to know developmentally when a student is ready or not receiving the interventions they could use to catch up. So, in some countries, they don't start reading until they're 7 years old. In other places, some parents expect their children to read at 5. There's probably something in the middle of that is much better as a balance. But, if a parent has a child who's in 2nd grade and they're still at high risk, and be quite a bit below benchmark, specifically in like RAN area that we know is so important. At what point are we raising the flags with the family, or the families are raising them with us? Do you know what I'm saying? I'm just listening to the public comment we had tonight, and it was just heartbreaking to hear that one person said their son is pretending he's reading and he can't read in school. And, we have so many resources, it's so many smart people to help with intervention. There's a specific benchmark, each child's unique as a learner, but just, how are we thinking about that? Addressing needs in a timely fashion and not waiting till a child's in 3rd grade and failing.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big purposes of doing this, because we can get down to the very specifics of each student performance. I think the thing is, we also don't want to raise a flag of
Right,
concern
I agree.
if we don't, if it's not there. And so absolutely, if there's a student, so that what the assessment does is when we look at a roster, it flags students that are at higher, like highly high risk. I don't know how you want to define that, but it's defined there. And we absolutely wouldn't let a student go. And that's the beauty of like, and I heard Lisa talk about like this reimagining this CST process and being able to really leverage that. And that is a gen ed piece. And so I think what we've done is we've gotten our first benchmark. We're going to give it, I mean, January is coming up very quickly. We'll reassess students, and then that will give us sort of the landscape to look at where our students are at. If there is a student that's, high risk more, multiple times, we are going to address that with
Yeah,
students.
and share that with families, right,
Absolutely,
Michelle?
yeah.
Yeah, because they
Oh,
need to be in the loop
absolutely.
in that for sure, and you need their support, yeah.
Yes, what we're not doing is raising a lot of concern right now by just wholesale mailing out.
No,
all
I
of
understand that. That makes sense to me. That makes sense. I had just a quick question, another quick question, if you don't mind. How long is the Heggerty done in a school day? I mean, is that a 10-minute lesson? Is that a half-hour lesson? Is that a?
No, 10 minutes, like 10 minutes at most.
10 minutes, right,
Yeah,
okay.
and teachers are incorporating it oftentimes in their morning meeting. Or like if there's some small transition times between a special or something, or lunch, etc. Or some people are also doing it right before like an oral warm-up before funding.
Yeah, okay. So we have plenty of time for read alouds that we still love and vocabulary development. and-
It feels like games for the kids. So
Yeah.
it's a perfect thing to put into morning meeting.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you, David.
So we're talking a lot about the importance of assessments clearly, but sort of the next step, once you have assessed a student and a group of students, would be the responsive instruction goal. And I think earlier on in the presentation, there was a mention that most of that would be at the tier 1 level, but I'm wondering how that would work, because if there are certain subsets of students that have greater needs than others, would that be an indication that there needs to be a tier 2 level support or even 3?
Well, I think we always want to start with the tier 1, and then depending on how a child performs, when we have really thoughtful tier 1 that responds to a student's assessment results, their areas for growth. If the changes to tier 1 aren't doing the trick, then we do need to think about tier 2. So it could impact tier 2. It could then impact tier 3 also. But I think there's a lot of leeway within tier 1 to make changes to address specific needs. I mean, that's really the whole premise of differentiated instruction, is giving students what they need at tier 1.
And how does that monitoring work? Who would be involved in that? Is that the classroom teacher, the literacy specialist, literacy coaches?
Yep. So I think first and foremost, it's the classroom teacher. And then certainly, I know a lot of teachers call on the coach or the specialist just to provide some additional capacity or support or an extra set of eyes, but it does start with the gen ed classroom teacher.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, David.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
So I just feel like I was trying not to jump in. I think one of the benefits too is that when you look at that individual data and you start to like really look at the specifics. So if you have kids in the red that are underperforming for where we want them to be at the moment, you can use that to inform instruction, whether that's, I think Leslie was sort of talking about this, like interventions within the classroom, tier 1 and like intervention. So if you say, oh, I have like this group of students, I mean, I don't know, I'm not speaking for the district, I'm speaking for myself. You can, do things like activities on blending or leaving off initial sound, some of that phonemic awareness, so that you can try to do some of those interventions before the middle of the year, right, to look for growth. Or maybe it's a tier 2 intervention with another reading specialist, or you can really, that's the benefit of having a lot of great data like this, is you can really target some of that instruction. And then my comment for OTL actually was just, I feel like I say this a lot, to remember, I know you will, that next year, all those new to K through 2 teachers will need to think about their PD in training them. Like I say new to K, like somebody's switching grade levels or new to the district, that we just have to remember to go back and provide that level of that entry training as well. So just to think about that, or budget for that, I guess, is where our purview lies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you. That was a lot of information. It was great. Thank you.
Helen?
Thank you. I thought I had my hand up and I realized after a while that I hadn't put it up. First of all, thank you for this very comprehensive report. I had one question and then one comment. My question is, all of this was precipitated through the state by a law about dyslexia, but yet what we're doing, from what I understand you saying, we're not screening for it. And so there's a disconnect for me. Maybe you can help me to understand it, because I must say it's something that concerns me. I've run into a few parents who've had kids who've gone and not been diagnosed because the kids were quite smart and were able to get by for a number of years till they couldn't anymore, but couldn't read. They were brilliant. They could, fake it. But so I'm wondering, my question is, how does this work together?
So do you mean, so when you say we aren't screening, so we are screening for disabilities. And when we look at that bottom at-risk number, those are the kiddos that we are screening in, but we're not diagnosing them, right? So when we look at that at-risk number, of the 6% in second grade, maybe 3% of them have a learning disability, maybe 3% of them have some other learning challenge that's not a disability. So we are screening them, we're just not diagnosing them based on this assessment. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I guess what I worry about are the kids who slip through the cracks, who are very bright and don't get diagnosed, and that issue. And I think we will get closer to knowing that through this. And I assume from what Michelle said and what you've said, that there will be feedback to parents sooner rather than later in terms of a number of these things. I just don't. I want to try and make sure that we don't have kids who fall through the cracks.
Well, I think this is one of the places where, the comments about BAS, they're warranted. So BAS would not, for instance, screen for a disability. Right. And prior, that was the only assessment we have. Right. It's subjective, it's time consuming. So when that's the only assessment you have, that's really problematic. Because then that's how kids are getting by. But with M-Class, they shouldn't be getting by us. Okay. If they are, that will be a problem. And so that's what's going to be really interesting to look at over time is it telling us the children, is it actually indicating the children who do have a disability?
Okay, no, that's really
important to remember over time. The over time, that this is just our first time.
Oh, I'm not better at that. I get it. I get that part. I'm not even going there. And I wholly support you not just sending out reports to parents, because I think they don't know how to read it. I mean, I have a son myself who decided he didn't want to read until first grade. And he only changed his mind when he saw he was in the lowest reading group and realized, no, I have to learn to read. And by the end of first grade, he was reading very well. So it's developmental, and I understand all that. But I support the fact that parents need to get this information at some point, but need to get it from the teacher. Hopefully in their conferences, we have those conferences. It's a wonderful talking tool that they can use with parents to help them to understand how their kids are doing. So I would highly recommend using it there and not sending it out. So thank you.
Thank you.
One other quick question. What is MSB? You had it in your slides. You
So-
had MSB in your slide, and I
That's the-
don't know what it is.
That's the queuing system. So that's meaning, syntax, and visual information.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Valerie?
Thanks, David. So I actually just want to follow up on the first part of Helen's statement question about the dyslexia law and where this came from, because it was a great presentation, but I'm still not clear at what point you would ever send a child for a neuropsych for an actual dyslexia diagnosis. Is that never going to happen before second grade using this system? And what are the factors? What triggers for PSB a referral to a neuropsych for an actual dyslexia evaluation?
So I think there are a number of factors that do. So certainly if a child in 1 year continues to test in a high risk, then we need to figure out what is the next step. And that shouldn't go beyond a year. But it shouldn't be dependent on just one test administration. You know, one example of this is we have a student at a particular school where the principal reached out to say, hey, we had some questions about this child. Their language was pretty delayed, but they're really young. They're in kindergarten. It's early in the school year. We're not sure what to do. Now we do want to pursue an evaluation based on the results of the M-CLASS and the DIAL together. So I think that the M-CLASS can kind of speed, if we're having questions and we're seeing need, it can kind of speed up where things go. But in terms of criteria for when we then pursue an evaluation, we don't have that specifically, Val. But I would say that with M-CLASS, you're testing 3 times a year. And if a child is coming up at risk more than once, then people are going to look really closely at that. And also a parent should be informed at that point for sure.
We don't have that in policy or anything, Leslie, that a parent's notified after whatever, 2 times in the red or 3 times in the red.
No, this is our first administration, so we're just really figuring out what's what. Something could come from that, I think, you know, in the future, but we're just kind of, you know, getting our feet under us.
Okay, thank you.
Nancy?
So first I wanted to say thank you as well. I think that this work is so important, and the fact that you've begun this is such a huge step. And I just wanted to say thank you to the whole team. And on that note, what I'd like to know, I think we've kind of touched on it. What is the buy-in from teachers, the actual people that are the staff that's actually performing these assessments? I'll stop there.
Well, it's going to be interesting. I mean, we're just in the process of collecting just feedback from the teachers on how it went. I think a lot of the initial feedback has not necessarily been about the data that we've gotten back, but about the actual like implementation and the administration. You know, so like, again, the computer was really hard to administer the assessment. What can we do to make it easier? I am not privy to any feedback that maybe coaches or specialists got during the October data meetings. I would assume that there was some data given around the assessment. I mean, I think initially what we're definitely hearing is that it's faster than the assessments that were in place. It's giving better real-time data, and it's creating a data dashboard that then teachers can use in their classroom right away. I mean, for an example, when we would do the BAS, the teachers get the results, they send the results back to us. We put it into a spreadsheet, we do graphs, we document, we send the data back. Well, by the time we get the data back to the teacher, it's no good anymore.
Yeah.
The data they get, they can use immediately. There's an immediate data dashboard and it's up to date. So I think the buy-in, I'm making an assumption here, is good. I mean, the fact that we got everyone tested is huge. Our educators really came through for us. Now what we have to figure out is how to make the administration a little bit easier. What are the places where we can make it more efficient?
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation and tolerating our many questions. But as you can see, literacy being the building block of our children's education is very important to a great many of us. And I'm sure we'll be having further discussions as this process progresses. So thank you very much again.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have school committee actions. And the first one is Public Schools of Brookline Equity Policy, Staff Recruitment and Retention, first reading. So for a little bit of background on this, the Subcommittee of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice has been working on this. Andy was the primary drafter with a lot of input from Ms. Hutaro. And we also took this up at the policy subcommittee meeting. There were a few suggested revisions to the initial draft that we had looked at. The main revision was around Part B, community building, where there was a second bullet that had initially read, confront and challenge biased, racist, and xenophobic behavior at the moment it occurs, especially in group settings. Some policy subcommittee members had concerns about how that would look like in terms of as an actionable item, and just wanted to understand better the thinking behind that. So that's currently been removed from this version. Also, there is now an explicit mention of affinity groups in the context of validating and affirming educators across multiple layers of identity. Would anyone else like to comment on modifications to this policy? Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something else that had come up in policy subcommittee, which was a desire that there be some explanation or motivation for why we need this policy, possibly with reference to research. And it was felt that this might go as a series of whereas clauses at the head of the overall equity policy, of which this would be just one part.
Anyone else? All right. So again, this is just the first reading. We'll be talking about it again at an upcoming meeting. So now let's move on to Public Schools of Brookline Staff COVID-19 Vaccination Policy first reading. So this is in response to a lot of input we received at a prior full school committee meeting where there was some concern about rescinding the policy as an entirety. It was important to many school committee members that we maintain the COVID-19 staff vaccination policy. So some modifications that were made to it is instead of requiring and mandating that there be booster vaccines taken by our staff as part of the requirement for maintaining their employment, it's going to be strongly recommended. But what they still have to do is demonstrate full vaccination, and the definition for that remains having the initial 2 shots if it was Pfizer or Moderna, or the single shot if it was Johnson & Johnson. Would anyone like to add anything to that? No? Okay.
David, can I ask a question?
Go
This is
ahead.
Mariah. Is that definition the commonly accepted definition these days for
It is.
employers?
That's the definition that the CDC has been using for full vaccination.
Thank you.
All right, and now we move on to a possible vote to approve a contract with Superintendent Guillory. So I think I speak for many of us when I say that we are very pleased with Dr. Guillory's performance as superintendent thus far. He received proficient on the superintendent evaluation last year, and we are hoping to achieve stability in the district. We've gone through a lot of superintendents in the last few years, And so this contract reflects the school committee's commitment to retaining Dr. Guillory for hopefully a very long time. At our last school committee meeting, we met in executive session to discuss the particulars of the contract. We came to, essentially it seemed that a lot of us had a consensus that we would like to retain Dr. Guillory and that we were satisfied and pleased with the terms of the agreement. So now it is our opportunity to formally vote the contract. So having said that, I would like to move that we vote to approve the contract with the superintendent of schools, Dr. Linus Guillory. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Suzanne. Helen, your vote?
Yes.
Valerie?
Enthusiastically.
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Absolutely, yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Nancy?
I'm gonna need some direction here because I missed the last school committee meeting and I missed that executive session as well. So I almost feel like I would like to vote yes, but I don't know what I'm voting on. And so what, should I abstain? What should I do?
It's up to you. You did receive a copy of the contract prior to the last meeting. I don't know if you had an opportunity to review
I
its
did
terms.
prior to the last meeting, but
Okay.
was that
Does-
changed? Was that edited in any way?
It has not been changed.
Okay, then I'll vote yes.
Okay, and I also vote yes. So congratulations, Dr. Guillory. All right, next up we have subcommittee and liaison reports. Helen, capital improvements.
I think I reported out last time on our capital improvements meeting. One note, people should be aware that tomorrow, which I'm surprised they're having it, the Preservation Commission is having their meeting on our request for demolition of the Pierce 1970s building and our request for renovations to the historic building. So I will be going there, and I don't know if anybody else would like to join me. You're more than welcome. But I was surprised that they would have it during town meeting.
Helen, can you mention what time?
Yes, it's the first item on the agenda, and to the best of my record, they start at 6:30. I think they said 6:40, but I would be there at 6:30.
No town meeting until next week again, Helen. We're off.
Oh, okay. There goes my knowledge of that. Sorry. Then I shouldn't have said anything about that. Sorry.
All right, anything else you'd like to report on for capital?
I don't think so. Val, do you have anything? Or maybe next meeting?
Next meeting for Driscoll, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
All right, Jennifer, curriculum.
Actually, I don't have much to report out today because we did not hold a November subcommittee meeting in lieu of a number of items being put on full school committee agenda, and we'll be meeting Tuesday, December 20th next.
All right, Valerie, DEIJ.
Nothing new since our November 10th meeting, so we're meeting the 5th, and David, you and I are going to get together about a joint policy DEIJ meeting to move forward on the next iteration of the equity policy.
All right, Mariah, finance.
Finance met last week, and we reviewed the structure of the proposed structure for the budget for this upcoming year. And the next steps are that Linus is going to review it with Ruth Burdell, who's the A&F consultant, just to confirm whether there's any needed structural changes to that to align with the DESI reporting and the restructuring of the chart of accounts. And so, but it seemed like it was a pretty good meeting, and we reached hopefully consensus on what the budget will look like for the upcoming year.
All right, Suzanne, government relations, no update, okay. Policy, as I went over briefly before, we discussed the equity policy, specifically the portion for staff recruitment and retention. We also discussed the COVID-19 vaccination policy. And we will next meet the second Monday in December. Any additional liaisons or updates? Go ahead, Nancy.
Given the recent uptick in children's hospitals being overrun in the emergency rooms, are we affecting policy in any way, shape, or form? Are we addressing this in any way?
Dr. Gaylor, I'll turn that to you about how we're responding to the current health situation.
Can you give me a little bit more?
So right now, between flu, COVID, and RSV, children's hospitals and regular ERs are overrun much in the same way that COVID affected hospitals and ERs. Brookline at the time came together with a panel 4, and we were very close contact and reported very closely. I don't know that we're doing anything. Are we doing anything within the schools regarding reporting flu? Or I don't want to alarm the public, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed, or I would like to see addressed, in my opinion.
So Tricia and I think we actually talked about this last week, and I wish Lisa was still on because she probably could update it more directly. This was actually maybe a principals meeting. Tricia updated us on where we stood. And our numbers up until that point, we've been averaging with COVID confirmed has been in the 20s per week. And I think at the time she indicated that we had, I think, 6 cases of RSV as such, and certainly recognizing the uptick in the flu season right now. I was with the principal today, and she was sharing how hard hit her building has been with flu in those terms. But right now, the suggestion is certainly around the masking, staying home if you're sick, and those types of things. But Tricia Laham continuously connects with Segal in the health department, as well as some representatives from Panel 4, but not the full context of the Panel 4 group that was in place then. Mm-hmm.
Are we giving, other than the standard, I mean, you can't test for flu, right? You can test negative for COVID. But, I think I'm sorry, I'm tired, so I'm finding a hard time finding the words. If you don't have a fever, then, for 2 days,
the reminders and those types of things, yes. Okay. Yep. Okay. Those will still be going out and updating folks on those health precautions.
I would also add that just this past weekend, there was I believe, a flu vaccine clinic at Ridley. All right, is there any new business? Well, we do not have need for executive session, so we can now adjourn.
Good night, everybody.
There you go.